right. Well, good morning. Welcome to the 2024 USNC-URSI National Radio Science Meeting Plenary Session. I'm Jay Messina Simpson. I'm the chair of USNC-URSI. And since we have both new and returning people attendees at this conference, I wanted to give a very brief overview of USNC-URSI, and for that I'd like to start globally and introduce URSI. It was founded in 1919, and the International Union of Radio Science, it has a French name, and so the acronym is URSI. And it basically deals with everything radio science related, including research and applications, and helps with the scientific exchange of information. There are 10 scientific commissions, the same as what we have here at USNC-URSI. You can learn more at the link that's provided on that slide. And then, getting more now to our local chapter or our local committee, USNC-URSI, every member country of URSI has its own national committee, and so USNC stands for United States National Committee, and that's for URSI. It's appointed in the United States by the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering and Medicine, and also it's one of 24 scientific unions reporting to the Board of International Scientific Organizations, or BISO, at the National Academies. We have two websites. The first one here is managed by the National Academies, and the second one is, at the moment, more of an archive website. You can find past plenary talks, recordings, abstracts, minutes of meetings, and lots of stuff at that website. And lastly, I'd like to kind of mention the importance of USNC-URSI. We're the only U.S. organization that represents applied electromagnetics. And also, we're one of the few conferences that fosters and promotes works in progress. So you can get feedback on works in progress at our conferences in the talks that you're giving from experts in the field. And also, we provide extensive support to students, which in the form of travel support, our mentoring luncheon, which is right after the plenary session this morning. There are many ways to get involved in USNC-URSI. This is the beginning of a new triennium, and we have lots of new initiatives that we'd like to pursue, but for that we're going to need help. And so either in this triennium or for the next triennium, I encourage you to prepare yourself and get involved. You can become a commission chair. There's vice chairs. Depending on the commission, there could be secretaries, technical activities chair, and so forth. So tonight we have two more commission meetings, which even if it's not in your direct area, I encourage you to go to one of those to learn more about what the commissions are doing. We also have government liaisons, which we have some openings for still, members at large positions, those are voting positions, and society reps, the Women in Radio Science chapter, and also to get your foot in the door and get involved, you could also start by organizing special sessions and reviewing papers. For that, you can contact a commission chair. And we have a number of other committees and other efforts. So if you'd like to know more about how USNC-URSI works, you can go to our archive website. There's an operating manual there. You can learn about the various positions. Next, I'd like to thank everyone who was involved in all the work that was done in the last triennium. And you can find all the people I'm going to mention, because there's a large group of people who have put effort into this conference and all the activities over the years. And you can find this in the program from last year. It's posted on the archive website. So we have here are listed all the chairs of USNC-URSI for the last triennium, as well as the commission chairs. We also have the members at large listed, and the Office of International URSI. So these are officers that were elected on an international level to serve URSI. And the society representatives from last triennium at the National Academies, and we also have government liaisons from the last triennium. And the student travel program and paper competition, and we have the Joint Meetings Committee, and the Workshops and Short Courses Subcommittee, and Sponsors and Exhibits Subcommittee. So thank you, everyone who served in the last triennium, And on top of that, we also have reviewers and special session organizers, so there's a lot of people. So thank you very much. But in particular, I'd like to highlight the previous chair from the last triennium, Mark Newkirk. He was instrumental in helping us to navigate the pandemic, and he also put a great effort into putting a lot of new content on our archive website, among many other things. And having organized this meeting, or being part of this meeting, I know just how much effort he put into the last meetings that he's been involved in. So Mike, if you'd like to come down for a moment. I'd like to recognize you with a plaque for all your outstanding service. It says, for outstanding service, Michael H. Newkirk, Chair, USNC-URSI, 2022 to 2023. And there's an URSI logo and the Boulder flat irons on the bottom. Thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah. He wants to say a few words.
Here we go. Take this, Mike. I think it's on. Go ahead.
Good morning, everyone. I just wanted to say very quickly how honored, how much of an honor it's been for me to be the chair of USNC-URSI for just a couple of years, but a couple of very interesting ones. I think I had aspired to do more, but I'm happy to see that we're all back here together celebrating the 50th anniversary of meeting here in Boulder and seeing such a healthy turnout, especially last night, and just getting everybody back together again. So to me, that counts as success, and I'm happy to join a long line of esteemed colleagues as past chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you. I'd also like to thank all of our sponsors for this 2024 NRSM, Johns Hopkins Applied Physics Lab, and also URSI for the wires reception. And some others who have made critical contributions to this conference. Yaya, unfortunately, wasn't able to attend in person, but he was instrumental in planning this, the food that you ate at the banquet, for example, coming up with your conference gifts, and everything else relating to the 50th anniversary. Christina Padarino, you might have met at registration. She's here in Boulder and has been also instrumental. She's a senior conference manager. Colin Mahoney, who's in charge of the AV, he's right over here, so thank you, Colin. And Lance Cotton, who helps with developing the program and the review process. So thank you to all of you. And lastly, I'd like to just mention that we have one more speaker tomorrow after the plenary session, the 11th Hans Liebe lecture. He's traveling here from Germany, Ulrich Leonard from University of Cologne, Germany. And so please join us. That'll be in this room tomorrow at lunchtime, if you can join us. And with that, is Steve Weiss here? Great. So he will be giving the first plenary talk as part of our 50th anniversary. We're going to be getting an overview of all the great work that all the various commissions have been doing over the last 50 or so years, or longer. And we're going to start with Commission A. So Steve Weiss from Johns Hopkins, and the title of his talk is USNC-URSI Commission A, History and Mission. Are you? Okay.
Why don't we just plug your Mac in? Yeah. Just give me a second to get the chat window over here, and then we'll switch it. Watch out for the cable. No, we'll just leave it. I'm going to put it on him. Thanks. Okay, so let's get you wired up. So there we go. Pocket. And this is going to go on your ear. Good?
We all set? Oh, turn the gain down. I guess it's fine.
They're going to work with your glasses?
We'll see.
All right, there's your clicker.
Okay. Is the volume on now? All set? Is it work? I don't hear the volume out there. Okay. So good morning, everyone, and very glad everyone could make it. Well, I certainly enjoyed the banquet last night. And so I was asked to give this plenary talk on the 50th anniversary of URSI, USNC, and in particular Commission A. So I was a past chair of Commission A, and I was honored to be asked to do it, although there was a little nudging, but I'm happy to do so. I didn't have a lot of history of this, but thank goodness this booklet was put together for the 100th years of International Union of Radio Science. And a big thank you to Ross Stone, Paul Cannon, and Phil Wilkinson, because to be honest, I borrowed fairly liberally from many of the pages of this. But the Commission A itself, one of 10 URSI commissions. And the makeup of these commissions, the topics are, and the topics of principal interest within them, move the changing needs and interests of the scientific community. In particular, the description pulled right off our website, or the URSI USNC website, the description of Commission A, we really concern ourselves with electromagnetic metrology. And so to this end, we have measurements and standards. The Commission promotes research and developments in measurement and standards in time and frequency, including infrared and optical frequencies, measurements in the time domain and measurements in the frequency domain, measurements in telecommunications, measurements with lasers, quantum metrology and electrical methods and fundamental constraints, and then measurements and standards from DC to optical frequencies. I threw in a little quote here from Richard Feynman because Commission A is so interested in metrology and measurements and validation. And his quote was that it doesn't matter how beautiful a theory is, if it doesn't agree with experiment, it's wrong. And I paraphrased that a little bit. And I said, of course, the experiment, the measurement has to be done correctly because we got to make sure there are no cockpit errors in just the way we take the data. And, excuse me, not just the measurement, but the, often, sometimes we don't have measurements, but we have good computer simulations. But also, usually where the rubber meets the road is, does the simulation and does the theory match the measured data? Because if we have that, then we know we have a good theory. Excuse me. So this is all part of the URSI Commission A, URSI USNC. It's all part of the National Academy of Science in the United States. Is the adhering body of the International Union for Radio Science, URSI. And the National Academy of Science manages the relationship of URSI with the U.S. National Committee. That's the USNC that we see always attached to this particular meeting. And URSI is a non-government, non-profit organization under the International Council for Science, responsible for simulating and coordinating on an international level, on an international basis, studies, research, applications, scientific exchange, and communications in the field of radio science. So in general, Commission A is to promote research and development in the field of measurements and standards and physical constants, calibration and measurement of and measurement methodologies for improved quantification of uncertainty and continued achievement of accuracy and traceability of measurements. So it's always the common theme of the measured data. Areas of emphasis, of course, pertain to electromagnetic measurements and standards. And as such, the Commission fosters accurate and consistent measurements needed to support research, development, and exploitation of electromagnetic technologies across the spectrum for really all the commissions. Actually, there's a lot of overlap between what we do in Commission A and many of the sister commissions themselves. If we look at, this was borrowed from the book of 100 Years of URSI, but if you look at the, oh, thank you. If we look at the emphasis from the meeting in the Netherlands in 1984, the terms of reference, and this is from the international standpoint, time and frequency measurement and standards, including infrared and optical frequencies, pretty much mirroring what we still do. Time domain measurements, frequency domain measurements, laser measurements. Many of these were taken, they reflect frequency standards and electromagnetics. And this was borrowed right from the book on the 100 Years of URSI, and you can see the reference. And again, Commission A, as the marching orders kind of proceed, the research and development of the field measurement standards and physical constants, the areas of emphasis now include the development and refinement of new measurement techniques and calibration standards. Primary standards, including those based on quantum phenomena and the realization and dissemination of time and frequency standards. Characterization of electromagnetic properties and materials, physical constants, properties of engineering materials, and including nanotechnology. The methodology of electromagnetic dosimetry measurements for health diagnostics. Applications, biotechnology, including biosensing, and measurements in advanced communication systems. So the Commission really fosters the best practices, both at the international level and at the USNC-URSI level here in the US. Best practices, training for accurate and consistent measurements needed to support research development and the exploitation of electromagnetic technologies across the spectrum for all commissions. As commented, I did borrow a little bit from or quite a bit from the book, The 100 Years. And in particular, this chapter of the book, this is the hardcover that everyone saw, or that everyone received upon the registration. And so a big thanks to Ross Stone and Professor Aslangi for doing this. We also have Robert Bradley, Chris Crabtree, Mark Golkowski, Jamasia, and Kamal Sarabandi contributed to this. From the standpoint of Commission A historical work, in the area of measurements and standards, the USNC and from NIST, we developed the first practical, stable, easy-to-use standard in 1985. In the late 80s, U.S. advancements in near-field antenna measurements enabled significant cost savings in the design and development of antennas. 1993, Jutta Levine of NIST developed the Internet Time Service, which enabled computer clocks around the world to be set to a universal coordinated time. 1999, the primary time and frequency standard of the U.S. became the NIST F1 and then was replaced by the NIST F2 in 2014. All of these pertain to kind of the marching orders of Commission A and the development of standards as well as measurements. The optical frequency comb was invented in 2000, and a quantum logic clock was built by Till Rosenband in 2005 and perfected over the next 5 years. And quite recently, a very wide bandwidth, high sensitivity room temperature bolometer was developed by a group at MRT that uses the heating of electrons in graphene. Here's a picture taken out of the book. This is the NIST F1 cesium fountain atomic clock, which is the primary time standard in the United States. Here is Till Rosenband of NIST and the quantum logic clock, and a picture of that, again taken from the book. And actually not in the book, but I should give a little shout out here to Chris Holloway. A lot of work has been done in the last, I'd say 15 years on the Rydberg sensor, and really holding the promise to have a sensor that's really very electrically small that can detect electric fields of a very large wavelength. Chris is a member of Commission A and also a past chair of Commission A. And I think this is really some groundbreaking research that's been done in the more recent past. So at the end of the chapter of the book that you were given at registration, this, well, what's the impact for the next 100 years? And really, I think the work of Chris and the Rydberg sensor is kind of a segue into this. The impact of quantum physics on the traditional radio science discipline, it's already begun and will become more prominent in the future. Examples in the United States are work on the atomic clock and measurement of physical constants at NIST, and these, of course, are of interest to Commission A. The development and application of novel optical devices and electronic materials such as graphene is driven by the need to miniaturize devices and to synthesize materials of pre-assigned behavior. And this is being carried out at several research centers, and of course is of interest to Commissions B, D, and obviously Commission A. Our research and engineering physics as an academic discipline is to be expected, and Commission A will be part of this work, encouraging presentations on the latest developments. So just for your information, Commission A, here are the latest officers. We actually have I'm a past chair, but we have an opening for a vice chair. Our chair right now is Matt Simmons from NIST. We have a secretary, and right now one vacancy still to be determined in the vice chair. I took a quick look at the presentations at this present conference. Actually, all the Commission A presentations are on Friday, and really most of the emphasis here will be on antennas and propagation type topics. So clutter and noise, troposcatter measurements and models, that's tomorrow, 8:10 to 10 o'clock. Advances in antenna design, 10:20 to 11:40. And then finally, advances in electromagnetic measurements, antennas and beyond, and that'll be tomorrow afternoon, 1:10 to 15:10. So that is kind of a summary of my talk. To be honest, I didn't have a lot of background in the history, so it was a pleasure to kind of look all of this material up. And again, a big thanks to those that compiled the 100-year issue, and then in particular the chapter that talks about URSI USNC. So thank you.
Thank you very much. Well, thank you very much, Steve, and maybe we'll find a volunteer in our audience today to serve as And maybe we'll find a volunteer in our audience today to be vice chair of Commission A. So, next up, we're going to move on to Commission B. And giving the talk from Commission B, I'm just giving a very brief introduction to our speakers because we have a number of them, but you can find all their bios and their abstracts in the PDF version of the program posted on the NRSM website. So I'll wait for the slide to come up, but we have Branislav Notaros.
I have to go over there and turn it on. Sure.
Oh, I see. Yeah, and the title is Contributions and Accomplishments of USNC-URSI Commission B.
Okay, thanks so much, Jemesina, for this excellent plenary session. Great honor and pleasure to present about Commission B. I am an immediate past chair of Commission B, and I would also like to acknowledge and thank Yara Masami for inviting me and for organizing all of this. So, as Jemesina announced, I will be talking, of course, about contributions and accomplishments of Commission B. Okay. Oh, okay. Yeah, I noticed that something was a little bit off with respect to my slide that I prepared just last night. So, again, Commission B, and actually I was invited by Yaya to present this, but in making this presentation, I basically reached out to these esteemed colleagues and friends from Commission B. You see their names here. And I asked them to provide a slide or two on things that you will see, where I in particularly acknowledge each of them. So I would really like to thank all of them, and I felt it would be nice and fair to include them as co-authors of this presentation. So what is Commission B all about? Overview of the Commission B. We cover basically all technical and scientific topics related to fields and waves. The last kind of very accurate data that I have is from March of last year, 2023. And we had exactly 227 members. I think we now have at least 250 members. So I think we are basically the biggest commission in terms of numbers. The topics that we are covering, fields and waves, but for instance, for our Boulder meetings and also for our joint meetings with APS, summer meetings, we basically cluster our topics between antennas, propagation, scattering, and sensing, numerical methods, theory, materials, and education, another cluster, and then devices, systems, and applications is another big topic with subtopics, as you all know from the program. So we have a large number of papers, typically most papers in our winter meetings. We have a lot of participation and a lot of great participants in student paper competition, several winners. Good representation in every year. We are very keen and proud of our special sessions that you probably attended quite a bit of them in every year. And we also are a very active participant in our summer meetings jointly with Antennas and Propagation Society. This is, now I acknowledge Sembiam Rengarajan, who provided this extremely interesting history of basically URSI commissions, okay? And I learned a lot of information. Sembiam is here from what he sent me, and I'd like to share this with you. I'm pretty sure many of you didn't know all of these things. So the commission, the URSI, as Jemesina mentioned, set up commissions URSI started in 1919, right? But the commissions were set up in 1922. And the nomenclature was commissions 1 through 4 at that time. And you see here the list of these commissions. And then the commission 5, Roman letter 5, number 5 was added in 1928. Commissions 6 and 7 in 1948. 1928 and then 48, and Commission 8 in 1969. So basically, our predecessor of Commission B is Commission 6, Radio Waves and Circuits. And basically, so we are founded in 1948, as you can see here. And then in URSI General Assembly in Lima, Peru, in 1975, these commissions 1 through 8 were restructured in commissions A, B, C, D, etc. I think that was in 1975, and then Commission K, applications in medicine, was added in 1990. So this is the full history of commissions, as you can see here, and it was really interesting to see all of this. Also provided by Symbian is a very nice overview of all the Commission B colleagues who served as chairs of USNC-URSI. Jamesina Simpson last, previous, current. Previous was Symbian, and you see, of course, I will not read all these names, so very, very esteemed colleagues and dear colleagues took these important positions here. I apologize for the title. It's a wrong title, copy and paste title, but this is actually, again, from Symbian, a list of USNC Commission B colleagues who took a very important top position at international URSI level. So you have here URSI presidents, honorary presidents and presidents listed here, and then vice presidents of URSI, again coming from US Commission B only, and then chairs of Commission 6, which is our predecessor, and Commission B from US, seen here. The last one was John Volakis, just finished his term. And we would really like to acknowledge Russ Stone, who was also a member of Commission B and F, who took, as you all know, a lot of positions in international URSI, important positions. Now, talking about technical accomplishments of activities of Commission B, this is where I asked these 7 colleagues to provide a slide, one slide, on topics that I listed here. And the first one is John Volakis, his slide on antennas. He was able to provide here a nice overview done by Jim James in 1990. So it's about the third of our 50 years. And as you can see here, the list of these antennas, all of these antennas we still use. But if you look at the list of antennas, which is very extensive, that John put together for kind of emerging and currently used and most promising antenna concepts and realizations, you see that there is a lot of new stuff, right? Metamaterial antennas, all these antennas integration and systems, frequency, right? We are going millimeter wave, terahertz, and all of that, optical antennas. So a lot of kind of old stuff, great old stuff that we are still using, but a lot of new and emerging stuff that is kind of going forward. In terms of the list, always pictures are much better. So you have John's pictures of all these antennas and antenna systems here, equivalent to the list that he provided on the previous slide. I asked Carl Warnick, who is here, to give a slide on arrays. And he particularly focused on arrays, phased arrays for radio astronomy, where he basically outlined some challenges in terms of increasing the sensitivity of these arrays, going up in frequency, and then digital processing and massive data streams that are coming from these arrays and associated things. And then in terms of activities, there is theory and modeling, experimental characterization, and then hardware and algorithms, including a lot of signal processing, integration, and things like that. And you see here very nice pictures of these very interesting radio astronomy arrays that Carl provided. So I think this could be nice archival thing to have for future as well. I asked Satish Sharma, who is now Commission B Secretary, to provide a slide and his thoughts and some input on wireless communication and propagation. And he started with Marconi and the famous, communication between U.S. President and British King in 1903, and then some further development during World War I, all the way to 6G concepts and the systems, terahertz communication and all of this. Very important thing in wireless propagation that we do address is frequency spectrum, management and related things. We had an excellent plenary session 2 years ago about spectrum. That was definitely, something like this. I asked my friend Jen Pang from Illinois, who is unfortunately not here, to provide a slide on computational electromagnetics and numerical techniques. And he provided a very systematic and very exhaustive list of concepts and activities. Numerical methods, you have a list here, fast algorithms, domain decomposition and hybridization of techniques, hardware acceleration, very very current now and very important. And then uncertainty quantification and related issues, and optimization, design, and everything like that. And in terms of applications, you have a whole spectrum of applications that go over everything we do, kind of definitely go into other commissions' activities, and computational simulations and modeling are present everywhere. Ashwin Iyer from Alberta, Canada, has been a big contributor to our meetings in terms of special sessions on metamaterials. And he provided this slide on metamaterials and metasurfaces. So starting with the famous split ring resonator concepts and realizations, and EBG, electromagnetic band gap or photonic band gap kind of concepts, all the way to cloaking and holographic metasurfaces, tunable measurements, and much more recent advances. It's interesting to see here what Ashwin found and provided from Scopus, the occasion of occurrence of keywords on metamaterials here and metasurfaces here, how this is not exponential, this is vertical, faster than exponential growth of these citations and keywords. Bioelectromagnetics, second to last, Asimenia Kyorti, former Commission key chair, and also big contributor in Commission B. You have here, everybody is very well aware of things that we do in bioelectromagnetics, in biomedical applications of fields and waves. No need really for me to go through all of these. Pictures are extremely beautiful, extremely informative, and also you see these terms here as well. And then the last application for our friend Reyhan Bakhtur, who couldn't be here, who is currently new Commission B chair. I asked her to provide a slide on space applications. And again, pictures are phenomenal. I hope this could be put somewhere as a kind of in archival fashion on website or somewhere, just to, because I am not giving justice to these people who put so much work and then I'm presenting in half a minute. So going from things that we all talked about quite a bit, James Webb Space Telescope, a lot of, Voyager mission, very interesting, a lot of CubeSat, realizations and excellent pictures and projects. You have here the big ear and our late, colleague John Krauss, and also the Earth ionosphere propagation. It's not actually space, but it's close to space. So extremely interesting things to look at. And in closing, I would like to, again, emphasize how proud all of us are of having the 50th meeting here in Boulder. And I would like to congratulate all of us, all of you and all of us on that, and wish us all the best for the next 50 years in Boulder. As you can see here on the slide on the right-hand side, Boulder can be snowy and beautiful in winter, but it is also extremely beautiful in spring and summer and fall. So if you're visiting other than Boulder meeting, please, you're welcome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Okay, thank you very much, Bane, for that great overview of Commission B. And now we'll move on to Commission C. Dev Palmer will be giving this talk. The talk title is The Future of Signals and Systems.
I don't have my glasses on, so probably not. Thank you. In contrast with Commission B, Commission C is probably one of the smallest commissions in USNC-URSI. I remember when I was chair in the 2000s, I tripled the membership from 3 to 9. So we don't have the same basis for historical material that Commission B does, but that's okay, because if you invite somebody from DARPA to talk about history, they're going to tell you about the future. And that's what I'd like to do today. So Commission C is focused on signals and systems. And I'm going to go over a few slides here, some national level challenges facing communications, signals, and systems. Talk about some recent government programs, and also some relevant results from some DARPA programs that we're running right now that are related to Commission C topics. So over the last 30 years or so, a lot of research in microelectronics has been driven by the International Technology Roadmap for Semiconductors. And that was focused almost exclusively on transistor scaling, which has driven a remarkable economic machine over the last 60 years. But we're getting to the point where we don't have enough atoms to make a transistor, and we can't get rid of the heat. So in 2016, the International Roadmap for Semiconductors kind of evaporated, and now we have a bunch of different roadmaps that are disparate technologies, more focused niche technologies, and not really anything that you can point to guide research, both with industrial input, academic input, and government input. But fortunately, in 2020, the Semiconductor Research Corporation and the Semiconductor Industry Association put together the Decadal Plan for Semiconductors, and they outlined 5 major changes in the industry for information and communication technologies, which takes the focus off of the individual device. Not everybody wants to work on microelectronics and transistor scaling, and puts it up to a much larger level that I think encompasses signals and systems. And some of the challenges that we're going to face in the future for this kind of research are things like the analog data deluge. So it's estimated that the natural world produces something on the order of 10 to the 34th bits per second of sensory data. The average human can detect about 9 megabits per second. And so, how do we process that into something that humans can actually use? And furthermore, by 2032 or so, there are going to be 45 trillion Internet of Things sensors out there that are going to produce somewhere around a trillion terabytes of data per year, which is remarkable. So once you generate all that data, what are you going to do with it? We're not going to store all that data, but we're going to store a lot of it. So by 2040, it's probably going to be storing about that much data too, 10 to the 27th bytes. And if you look at current scaled memory cells. They weigh about a picogram. So 10 to the 27th bytes will actually use more silicon than we can produce. So this is a significant problem. And okay, so now you've got this stuff stored. How are you going to communicate it to other people? Well, right now, we can actually communicate the information we generate in a year in about a year. 10 years from now, it's going to take 20 years to communicate the information that we generate in a year. So facing these problems, I think that some of the signals and systems issues that Commission C looks at are quite relevant to this decadal plan and solving the big challenges that they're putting forward. Now, separately from the decadal plan, the pandemic brought microelectronics to a sharp focus at the government level, the US government level, where politicians finally realized that the microelectronics manufacturing and supply chain affects not everything from the F-35 to the F-150. And so they started the CHIPS and Science Act. I think everybody's heard about the CHIPS part of the CHIPS and Science Act, which is investing $52 billion in reshoring state-of-the-art electronics manufacturing and packaging to the US, and also has about a $2 billion investment in the microelectronics commons that's mostly university infrastructure based. But there's also part of the Science Act. The science part of the CHIPS and Science Act is $174 billion, a huge investment in STEM R&D, STEM-related R&D, and workforce development. That's been authorized by Congress but not yet funded, but keep your eyes on that because I think that's going to be a great source of funding for research in areas of interest to this group. This chart up here is something we put together to kind of try to deconflict all the different investments. DARPA actually does not get any money from the CHIPS Act. All of our investment is up in the upper right-hand corner. And you can sort of intuit from the way things are laid out here. Most of the CHIPS and Science Act investment is near-term technology. Microelectronics Commons is somewhat of an exception to that. And they're looking at 3D silicon to do this information and communications technologies. And all of that's very worthwhile to get the capabilities back on shore to weather the next supply chain disruption. DARPA, on the other hand, is looking at 3D heterogeneous integration where it's not just silicon, it's silicon and other compound semiconductors. And we're investing quite a bit of money in our Electronics Resurgence Initiative 2.0 that is funding programs in various aspects of manufacturing, advanced manufacturing research, and signals and systems as well. So if you take the challenges we're facing and the investment that the government is making and sort of rack and stack those, I think these are some interesting areas of research. A lot of these have been the focus of research for a long time, but there's always new technology available, new ways to interpret the laws of physics, not break the laws of physics, and new ways to get rid of old assumptions and see how you can change the technology if you just start from scratch, from a clean slate. So DARPA's been looking at some topics in this area, and you can see here some baseball cards for some of the programs that we're running right now. These are interesting in signals and systems for a couple of reasons, I think. If you look at the Griffin program right there, that was based on the assumption that if you want to make a low phase noise source for microwaves, don't upconvert, because that multiplies phase noise, downconvert from optical frequencies, and you can get the best performance ever. Of course, you can see they're trying to get that into the size of a quarter. That's kind of MTO's bread and butter, taking big things and putting them on a chip. The Prowess program, everybody loves FPGAs because you can do You can reconfigure them to do different signal processing tasks. But it takes milliseconds for an FPGA to load a new signal processing chain. The Prowess program, and I'll just refer you to the websites for the full name of the program because I can never remember them, is trying to make a reconfigurable processor that can handle multi-tens of gigabit streams of data and reconfigure at the speed of waveforms, which is like 50 nanoseconds. So that's highly specialized computing to handle the intentional and unintentional clutter and interference in the electromagnetic environment. Maybe in the last couple of minutes I have here, I can talk about a couple of these other things. Oh yeah, the Derby program is actually an electromagnetic environment emulator that has built the largest computer. It's a processor on a chip that has over 1 million cores running all at once. And you can take up to 200 virtual or real radios or other RF devices, radars, hook them up to this thing, and actually do the n-squared propagation calculations to see how they would interact in the real world. That's just demonstrating early performance, and we're looking to transition that into a nationally available resource very soon. And I think the last one I'll talk about is kind of interesting because it's the Whisper program. It's actually a bolt-on to a regular radio that uses spectral, temporal, and spatial diversity to make secure and reliable links on the battlefield with any radio that you want to plug in. And that is actually demonstrated fairly robust long-range communications at 30 dB below the noise level, which I think is pretty remarkable. So that's why I'm interested in Commission C, Signals and Systems, and I'm stepping in as the chair for the next triennium. I'd like to thank Greg Huff, the previous chair, for including me in all this fun. And so just in summary, you can read the words here. I'm just want to say that signals and systems are very important. Research in signals and systems, which is of interest to Commission C, is very important for overcoming these challenges that we see 10 and 15 years down the road. So I'll be around this afternoon if you want to dig into this more. There's a Commission C session this afternoon and another one tomorrow afternoon, and I hope you will attend. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. That was fantastic for Commission C. And now we'll move on to Commission D. And for this, we have two presenters, Zoya Popovic and Jonathan Chisum. And the title is A History of Technical Contributions.
We're going to share this one here. It's in the folder. Great.
They both work.
All right, good morning, everybody. So we're going to mix it up a little bit. I'm a fairly recent chair of Commission D. My knowledge, personal experience of the history of Commission D is about 6 years old. So I asked my graduate PhD advisor and former many times chair of Commission D, Zoya Popovic, to join me. So what we're going to do is I'm going to start with a high-level overview of the activities of Commission D. As you saw from Bana's talk, actually in 1948, kind of the early stages of Commission D were emerging, because we've always needed electronics in order to power everything we do here, right? And so, however, there's not a lot of specific activity in a dedicated commission until much later. We really see Commission D emerging after 1978 and really even closer to 1988, as you'll see here shortly. So I went through the abstracts from the archive, so thank you so much for all those that have put the effort into the archive, and picked out key topics. And what you can see here is, again, from 1978, Commission D appeared in the programs. And there was actually one paper in 1978, and that was on submillimeter wave power calibration, very relevant to what goes on here. And then there was a 10-year silence, no Commission D meetings, no papers. And then we pop up again in 1988. At which point we begin in earnest. We begin in earnest with devices and modeling, moving into integration of those devices, and then finally into components and instrumentation, which sort of feeds and powers a lot of what's done in the other commissions. And so I just want to pull out a couple of key words that I found and themes throughout the 1988 to present. And then we're just going to not do a comprehensive dive, but just take a couple of key themes and topics and give you some more information on those. So one of the things that you see early on here is that there's a lot of effort in solid-state device simulation and modeling. So this starts out primarily with gallium arsenide, as well as with a lot of the diode-based detectors, so Schottky diodes and eventually heterostructure backward diodes, HBDs. And that's really leading us up into 1990. You see some of the early Schottky diode work here with Tom Crow, which ultimately leads to the stuff that we can buy today from Virginia diodes and similar things. And then in the 90s, we start moving to more exotic materials, indium phosphide, which ultimately, as you'll see a little bit later, is popping up today in these super, super high hundreds of gigahertz systems. And then AlGaAs and GaAs transistors as higher frequency, more efficient, higher output power amplifiers and low noise LNAs. And even silicon carbide is happening here in the 90s. On the modeling front, we have short channel effects as we're scaling up into higher frequencies. And then you start seeing also a lot of work with parasitics, because we don't just want to make devices, we want to integrate them, and we want to put them in chips, and ultimately into MMICs, monolithic microwave integrated circuits. And in order to do that, we need to put transmission lines and passives on substrates. And so you see a lot of work in microstrip parasitics and coplanar waveguide parasitics. In addition to simply integrating them on chips, you also see them being integrated quasi-optically. And so you'll see that work starting to pop up in the 90s as well, with just generally quasi-optics, active antennas, grid oscillators, and the like. And then packaging and interconnects. All the while, we're pulling on advanced materials to try and find those new devices that are going to give us more performance at the frequencies of interest. Similarly, you get cryogenics, and a lot of these things are feeding into phased arrays. So that brings us into the 2000s, where again, we're tracking these themes of the diodes in particular being used as power detectors. Excuse me. And not just the early diodes, but diodes that perform better, diodes that are more easy to integrate. So you get these uniplanar millimeter wave and terahertz diodes, gun diodes for sources, negative differential devices, and then we're getting now into the wide bandgap semiconductors. So now we're getting not gallium arsenide, but gallium nitride and AlGaN devices, as well as more work on indium phosphide. And we're starting to really integrate these things into MMICs. Metamaterial starts popping up about this time as well. And a lot of this stuff is then feeding into radio astronomy components. So we've got correlators, LNAs, interconnects, studies with ALMA, SCA, the 1 Hector telescope, a lot of the electronics and components that are going into those. Meanwhile, we've got RF MEMS and micro-machined coax. These are going to be important later when we start integrating components for millimeter wave and sub-millimeter wave instrumentation, and then also a lot with photonic interconnects. More recently, into the 2010s, we're starting to see some of these wide bandgap semiconductors being used in efficient and reconfigurable power amplifiers And so we're getting efficient, higher frequency power amplifiers, more output power. In addition, the reconfigurable power amplifiers are starting to look at things like how are we emitting spectrum in various places. As we tune phased arrays over a field of view, the impedance is changing. We need to start tuning for that to maintain efficiency and output power. Also linearity. Silicon germanium pops up every once in a while. GaN on silicon for a little while. Then more kind of exotic things, tunable varactors, barium strontium titanate, and then just a lot of, now we've got these devices that are actually working well at these frequencies. So you start seeing a lot of components coming up, and then ultimately into actual full-blown micro integrated systems. So microcoaxial radar, imaging systems, and now we're starting to say, how do these, we can generate power at these frequencies, we can detect power at these frequencies, we can analog signal process at these frequencies. How do these waves then interact with the world around us? And you start seeing a lot of phenomenological work. That's on a biological front, but also calibration starts becoming really important. And so you see a lot of millimeter wave and terahertz calibration. And more recently, spectrum issues. So that kind of brings us through the activities from 78 to today. And now we're looking a lot at cryogenic RF. This has a lot of quantum applications, tunable circuits, more integration, spectrum and interference. How do these electronics actually, especially with the non-idealities, non-linearity and so on, interact? Active and intelligent surfaces, and just more work with instrumentation. And so I'm not going to brief this too long, but there's been a good history of millimeter wave and terahertz power measurement, calibration, and imaging applications. There's a lot of links with Commission A here, but here you see this is the first paper that popped up in the archive by Richards on absolute calibration of incoherent submillimeter radiation. And then you get a lot of this work on bolometers, and then more recently over at NIST and CU Boulder, bolometers for imaging, and then terahertz calibration sources. And then in that kind of same millimeter wave terahertz side, we've got the detection, we've got diodes being used as mixers and multipliers, so now we can actually take lower frequency instrumentation and get them up into higher frequencies. And you see the early emergence in 1989 of these kind of diodes, and then just continuing to advance all the way to where today, I can buy this if I have a lot of money. But yeah, so there's this strong history of millimeter wave and terahertz.
So John has actually, Dev gave a fantastic introduction to why electronics is important and what DARPA is doing. I want to point out that all the pictures you've seen are actually from URSI presentations that were here showcased for the first time, discussed, led to more advanced publications in IEEE, and then products and things you can buy today. And a lot of that is true also for development of mimics. And you can see here, I'm not going to spend a lot of time because we heard a lot about this already, but in URSI, some really state-of-the-art mimics were presented for the first time, started from X-band. The one, I'm not very good with this thing, the one you see in the middle ended up in a Lockheed satellite phased array, actually. And it's a very efficient X-band amplifier. And then more recently, there's some developments within the Starry Night program that have been presented here that are millimeter wave W-band mimics. And all of this is helping many of the commissions. In fact, I would really like to see more joint sessions because I think that Commission D could really contribute to a lot of instrumentation-based commissions as well. So here you can see some sub-millimeter wave direct detectors for CubeSats, and you can see very nicely how these mimics are integrated in an actual system. So let's see. Micro-machine coax papers have come up a lot, and here I want to point out that one of them was developed, for example, and this was Leonardo and Negarek's son. They're all, I'm very proud because my students are now taking over. There are 2 commission chairs currently that were my students, so they're really great, much better than their advisor. So these were some very interesting micro-machine components that were kind of the beginnings of 3D packaging technology. And in the end, they ended up in a real system. You can see that this is a coaxial bandpass filter. And what was this, John? You found this picture. I don't know what it is.
Yeah, that was the same indium phosphide direct
yeah,
detector
okay.
for a CubeSat.
And so it used one of the microcoaxial filters. This was actually a 220 gigahertz frequency scanned array that was delivered to JPL for planetary landing radar missions. And there was a lot of work in quasi-optics that John mentioned. When I arrived at CU, it was in 1990, and it was my first URSI conference then. And I got to see the work by Professor Ito, who sadly passed away recently, but he started a field of loading antennas with, so this heavy overlap with Commission B, loading antennas with active devices. In fact, neither does an antenna do much without some electronics, and a lot of electronics for wireless, of course, won't work without antennas, and so there's a heavy overlap with what Bane has been talking about. And this developed later on into, I'm showing Wayne Chiroma's grid, which one could argue was a very early meta-active, very, very active meta-surface. We just didn't use the word meta at that time. And an optically controlled phased array that won an award at MTT. Superconducting devices have been really taking off, but actually they're relatively old. This is a strong overlap with Commission A. Josephson junctions have been used for DC voltage standards and were presented at this meeting. Some of the first results were presented here. Since that time, there have been a lot of devices for the cryogenic environment. For example, a 1 gigahertz Josephson junction voltage standard was demonstrated relatively recently. It's a quantum-defined pure sine wave. And this year, you could have heard a lot about cryogenic RF devices for quantum computing, and it's a growing field. And so with this, we ended the presentation, but I wanted to say that this commission started very small, but recently it's been growing, and maybe, John, you can say how many sessions we had?
Currently we have actually 50 members, which is a lot of growth. And I think we had the highest attended commission meeting I've ever seen last night, so we're really encouraged by that. A lot of new early career members are coming in. And we, too, and you've heard this a lot, but I just want to emphasize special sessions have been critical to growth and vibrance in the commission. We had 5 sessions this year. 4 of them were special sessions. And we, I think we had 29 papers total. So that's a pretty good activity level for Commission D, being the size that it is. So thank you all for your continued activity. And I just want to echo what Zoya said, which is that we really, Commission D isn't much by itself. We really like to integrate the things that are going on in Commission D. We like to integrate them on the small scale, but also on the big scale with all the other commissions out here. So we are very interested in joint special sessions moving forward.
There was a very well-attended workshop also in hands-on phased array radar, and it was very popular, so we're going to repeat it next year, and I'd encourage all of you to learn about it and sign up. This was with the help of Analog Devices. So thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much for Commission D. Yeah, so it's going to take us a moment to switch to the next speakers. So I just wanted to take a moment and mention that, if you aren't already a member of a commission, it's fairly straightforward to do so. You can go to our website, USNC-URSI archive website. There's a link, and you can just fill out your involvement in USNC-URSI, and that you can submit that. We have everything from early career members, which might be a student who's attended this conference one time. So all of you in the audience, you already qualify to become an early career member. And then, of course, we have all the way up to full members. And you have to be a full member to become a chair. So I encourage you to become members. There's no cost, so I want to make sure you're aware of that. But you do get a reduced registration cost to you when you attend, hopefully next year. And I also can mention that there's a separate membership that you can have to International URSI. The information for that is on their website. So that's a completely separate membership that you can also get. Okay. And early career members is a fairly new membership level that we've added. And the motivation behind it is so that we could get more involvement from students and early career members. Really, you know, if we're looking at the future of USNC-URSI, it really relies on the next generation. And so we highly encourage students to get more involved. It's a great way to network and meet some of the senior members in the field. And so I encourage you to get involved. We're looking for people, as you might have known from attending a commission meeting, if you've done so. We're looking for people to help us have a better media presence, a social media presence, for example, a LinkedIn page, just starting with that. But there's a range of opportunities for you. So the next speaker, Commission E, I think we're at. So Bob Gardner was unable to attend, but we have two other speakers, which I can, I had a slide, but Jane Lair and Charles Dietlein. So
we're going to kind of tag team it.
Check 1, 2.
So I have to start out by saying I pinched Charles's slide. I just put my name and said I was the vice chair, which happened yesterday. So, but that's what happens when you're a pinch hitter. Yes, thanks. So we're Commission E, and Commission E is electromagnetic environmental and interference, and therefore everybody's a little bit involved in Commission E, because we all have it. If you work in electromagnetics, you definitely have interference. So the commission is really organized around naturally occurring and artificially induced EMI. So that is where you're the victim component, but also where you're attacking. And both of those have a lot of similarity, but also a lot of differences. We've also expanded since the origin to do much more. I found this very interesting exercise, seeing the evolution of our session. And nowadays, there's a lot of investment in the spectrum, which Charles is an expert in, thank goodness. Next. So here's our early history. Our first sessions here were in 1978. And that was mostly focused on EMI measurements. That was the heyday of weight and a lot of exciting things. The EMI measurements continue to be a big problem, but this is really where the center of all that was. A very natural extension of that, though, was into the high power area where you're trying to affect circuits. In 1982, the sessions were organized around noise characterization. And what I found interesting, there's a session on EMI noise from the sea. That is, how to use seawater propagation over, around, and then through the seawater, which again is a very topical, at the time. Also, noise and interference analysis. In the 80s and into the 90s, they were using a lot of noise to try to induce EMI, even as an attack mode. In the 90s, the focus switched more toward high-power electromagnetic interference and other sources, including how do you generate noise, and ultra-wideband. But also, this is where, in the late 90s, where we started to look at spectrum management for wideband emissions, and that has become a very important area. In fact, I was attending URSI's back in '99, and it was a big problem that we literally did not know how to address as from the high power source perspective. And URSI is a wonderful venue for generating solutions. As we moved into the 2000, we started to see a lot more joint sessions. The first one in 2002 was joint with F and J1 on mitigation techniques for remote sensing and radio astronomy. It's amazing how much commonality there is between power levels at remote sensing, which can be, nanowatts, and source generation, which is gigawatts. And I've known people that have worked in both areas simultaneously. We're carrying through the noise and the interference. It then goes into penetration of EM radiation and coupling into cavities. This continues to be a very important topic, and I'm continually amazed at how many people don't realize that coupling is frequency dependent. But that's why meetings like this are so important, because they're so interdisciplinary. The next decade really brought an amazing amount of diversity into our commission. And we see in the parentheses are all the joint sessions. So we see a lot of really, I call it cross-pollination. I don't know if that's the best word for it. But we're spreading out into different areas. And there's some themes that run through this. Again, we see a lot of spectrum issues, some waveform diversity, which is again becoming a hot topic. High power EM is sort of a very low level throughout this. Interference, and also lightning. So there's a lot of joint sessions with the lightning community. And that, of course, the source is natural, but the effects are the same. And also lightning and the interaction with the ionosphere. Again, very interesting topics, but next slide. So in the more recent meetings, it continues this really highly integrated topics. And we also see a couple of plenaries. Let's see, last year, there was one on spectrum use management and interference mitigation. That's a topic that's becoming more increasingly important to everyone in URSI. And we're planning on continuing that. Next. So Charles is really going to talk about what we're looking for the future, but I'll put in a plug here for high power electromagnetics, because that's what I do. And high power electromagnetics, you actually need a lot of different skills. You can do everything from antennas to, plasmas. It may be in a single system for testing. But one of the things that we have to make sure of is that our young engineers just don't become testers, that they retain that science aspect of it. And so I think there's a growth opportunity. And my model for growing the high power aspect is Carl Baum, who was one of the original URSI influences. And in fact, there's many people in particularly in the high power, who were there because he invited them. So I'm going to do that, and I'm here because Bob Gardner, we just reconnected when he looking at this for this meeting, and he invited me, and he said, "Well, why don't you come?" And I said, "Sure." So anyway, that's one plan we have. Charles.
Thank you very much, Jane, for that. And yeah, it's really too bad Bob couldn't be here. He was here at in Boulder at the first Commission E meetings in 1978. He has his own notes from those meetings and the ones in the 80s. So he provided us with a lot of historical information, and it would have been great to hear it from his own perspective. So Bob invited me to join Commission E earlier in this year. I've been doing things that are adjacent to it for many years, but I'm also happy that to be the chair here. So I am the new chair, and thank you, Jane, for taking on the history part, since you have more insight into that than me. For those of you who don't know me, I work for the Institute for Telecommunication Sciences, which is the research lab of the National Telecommunications and Information Administration. I only say that because I see a lot of young people in the room, and a lot of people aren't aware of NTIA and what its role is. And so just to clarify, NTIA is sort of to federal use of the spectrum what the FCC is to non-federal use of the spectrum. And I say that because it provides context for the direction that we're going to be going in the next few years. At ITS, we do a lot of research and interference analysis. That is sort of how federal systems interact with each other, how they interact with non-federal systems, and focus really on this thing called interference protection criteria.
or IPC. And so I'm excited to bring some of those real-world challenges and the problems we're facing to Commission E. And it's right in ITS's backyard, of course. You know, some of the things, I think it's interesting to look at the history of Commission E in the context of spectral harmony and spectrum management. Those are some of the research areas that are in, if you go on the website and look at the list of topics, the Commission E covers. If we go back far enough in time in the history of this commission, we can see that the challenges we were facing then, we couldn't have even thought of the challenges that we have now back then. It's just such a different world. And although some of the things, we call them the same thing, like Jane talked about the interference analysis session in the 80s, and that's the term we call it today, it's really not the same thing at all. What I mean by that is, in the past, we were thinking about out-of-band, unintentional man-made interference, adjacent channel problems largely introduced by things like not having great filters. And this was in the news recently, the 5G and radar altimeter issue. Decisions were made a long time ago about how to build radar altimeters. They operate in the 4.2 to 4.4 gigahertz band. They worked very well when there was nothing in the environment around them. But then a 5G band popped up just south of there, 220 megahertz away. And that happened to be in the receiver band, in the received bandwidth of the radar altimeters. And so the problem there is obvious, but the solution is not that academically interesting. It's filters. So I put that in the category of decreasing emphasis, because although those problems are going to remain, and you know, the 5G and radar altimeter issue was in the news just a year or two ago, the spectrum is getting more and more crowded, and we know that filters are the thing we have to think about by default now. So what I see more in the future directions here are things like co-channel intentional interference. And this is something we weren't thinking about in 1978 for sure. An example here, also ripped from the headlines, is on December 14th, the FCC granted a special temporary authorization, or STA, to Starlink or SpaceX, whichever way you want to refer to them, basically authorizing their NGSO, or non-geostationary orbit satellites, providing, in ITU terminology, mobile satellite service to unmodified 4G cell phones. And they call it direct-to-cell. You can go on their website and find this diagram. I should have credited it. But essentially, these are flying cell towers in space. And there are a number of them in orbit right now. And there's a real issue with that. Although if you're a T-Mobile customer, you might get to use this in 2024, make text messages from places where there are no ground-based cell towers. That's called, I think, supplementary coverage from space, or SCS. But there's a big problem. Radio astronomy quiet zones, such as the National Radio Quiet Zone around Green Bank, have coordinated very carefully with thousands of cell phone towers within the surrounding hundreds of kilometers to reduce interference and understand exactly what that interference looks like. NSF is coordinating with SpaceX and Starlink on this problem. But even if Starlink, we'll say, cooperates and turns off the transmitters when they're anywhere near the National Radio Quiet Zone, the internationally accepted protection thresholds will still be exceeded by over 100 dB due to side lobes from the satellites that are nowhere near that. So these are the types of challenges that we're dealing with today, and where things are going to go in the future, even more. And that leads me to this, how do I know that? Well, on November 14th, the White House released the National Spectrum Strategy. And this is a document authored by my colleagues in DC in the Office of Spectrum Management. But it's really, so it has a special place in my heart for that reason. But it's really interesting to see such a high-level document pushing enhanced and expanded use of spectrum, with such authoritative force behind it. There was a presidential memorandum that accompanied it also. I'm not going to read you the pillars. The first one is about all these bands becoming available. The second one is about a planning framework for kind of a whole-of-government approach to making decisions about spectrum planning and needs. The third pillar is about technology development, and that's really interesting. There's a lot of fun things in there. And the fourth pillar is about education and workforce development and expanding national understanding of spectrum challenges. There's one thing, and you should go read the document, it's on the internet. There's one thing that's really important to take away, and why I said these challenges are just going to get more and more. It explicitly describes a number of bands that are going to be, there will be some sort of commercial access to them in the near future, and just about 3 gigahertz of total bandwidth. So I listed most of the bands there. I skipped 1 or 2, I think. My point is, we know what the bands are, we know what systems are in them, and so I think from a Commission E perspective, it's very interesting to try to tie our good ideas here about interference analysis, spectrum sharing, et cetera, to the things that we know are coming down the pipeline in the very near future. We don't have to, there are a lot of very good academic ideas that have greenfield approaches. There are a lot that constrain the problem somewhat, but these are real constraints in reality. We know what these systems are and in which bands they will be. So NSS is moving forward. There's something called the implementation plan that is going to be released around the April timeframe to describe which agencies are responsible for which outcomes and what those timelines are. Importantly, I think, are these band studies that will be conducted by the Office of Spectrum Management. I want to be able to point to URSI, Commission E, Commission D, C, B, and E papers and presentations and feed them into this process to give good information about ideas on how to solve these challenges moving forward. I'll just also mention there's a dynamic sharing, spectrum sharing testbed that's going to be stood up within 18 months, and so stay tuned. That could be interesting for a lot of experimental demonstrations of some of the technologies I've seen talked about yesterday. I'm going to skip this in the interest of time. And so for the path forward, because, like I said, we know what's coming down the road in terms of these bands and having to deal with, we'll just say, a lot more systems in them, too. Not just the spectrum sharing challenges, but perhaps interference to adjacent bands where those adjacent bands didn't have to deal with that in the past because the federal systems were such scant users of it. So I want to fill sessions, workshops, and short courses here with relevant research to solving NSS challenges. We need to close the gap between academic concepts and the current systems that occupy those bands. A lot of the information is hard to get, but a lot of it isn't, and so I encourage everyone to reach out to myself and others. There are a number of new Commission E members that are ITS employees like myself, and we'd be happy to work with you on these problems. I'm not going to read the last few bullets. I agree that joint sessions are extremely important, as Jane said. We've had a long history of joint sessions with Commission C and D. I will say we're a very small commission, and we compete with DEV for smallest commission. And so our business meetings are usually shared, and that's why. So thank you for your time, and that's all I have.
Okay, thank you very much. We have one more commission before we'll have a break. I didn't get to show this before, but thank you, Charles and Jane. And now, next we have from Commission F, David Kunke, and the title of the talk is 50 Years of Wave Propagation and Remote Sensing Science at the National Radio Science Meeting in Boulder, Colorado.
Okay, can everyone hear me? Okay, it's my pleasure and honor to represent Commission F here this morning in the plenary. My presentation will be a collaboration with friends and colleagues in a similar manner as some of those before. I'd like to mention Chris Ruff, contributions to Chris Ruff, Tom Hanley, and amendment, and also Gary Brown, Fawaz Ulabi, Ed Westwater, Al Gosefsky, Steve Rising, and Cal Swift, without whom this wouldn't be possible. Okay, so I have a little bit I hope for everyone here, a little bit of history of Commission F, and then really how remote sensing became part of Commission F, whereas originally in 1974, remote sensing didn't even appear in the title. And then a little bit on the evolution of the wave propagation aspects of Commission F, and then I'll dive into different aspects of remote sensing and how that's changed over the last 50 years or so. I don't really look at things before 1974. My first talk here was 1992, and it was very interesting for me to dive into the archive. So the people that put together the archive page, I really thank them, because without that, this perspective wouldn't be possible. As far as themes, there's a couple of themes that I'd like to bring out. One is inflection points. A lot of times we go along thinking the landscape is relatively the same year to year, and then suddenly it changes because of knowledge or discovery. That's prevalent in a couple of times in Commission F that I'll talk about. And the other is the contribution of individuals that really can make a difference, particularly when you have large collaborative missions and somebody really has a vision for what can happen, and it can bring about changes in our collective knowledge on a really large scale. And then I'll finish with kind of some notes on the culture of Commission F, a relatively large commission, not the largest, and about the NRSM-URSI conference. So I hope there'll be something for everyone. So looking back at the archives, Commission F comes from Commission 2, radio and non-ionized media. So by then, it already moved radio, the reflections from the ionosphere had already been moved to a different area, and we were looking at really radio and propagation into where we don't have charged particles. And as I mentioned earlier by the Commission B talk, in 1975, the International URSI meeting in Lima, they had really gone to this new definition of the commissions, A through J. Here I have listed. And Commission F then was wave phenomena in non-ionized media. Again, remote sensing is not present. But then in the Boulder meeting, we were still back into the structure of Commissions 1 through 8 because these hadn't been approved by the US government yet. I find that was kind of interesting. So there was still some reshuffling going on. And then by 1978, we had wave phenomena in non-ionized media. We had adopted the International URSI title. Then came kind of a change. In the 20th General Assembly, this is when remote sensing first appears in Commission F, wave propagation and remote sensing. And at the URSI meeting in Boulder, 1982 is when these new titles. So why did it happen at that particular point? So before 1980, say in the 70s, we had very few satellite missions. And when we started to get, in 1970s, in the mid to 70s, CSAT, GEOS-3, and Skylab, these included many, this mission, NASA mission included many instruments that provided the measurements really to focus on remote sensing. And in particular, in the discussions we had, this really came out in a special issue that was between the antenna propagation and ocean engineering in 1977 with Cal Swift as a guest editor, where he talks about the background of where remote sensing was at the time. And it's very interesting. I have a chart. The next chart is a couple of quotes from that preface. And then if we look after this mission, which provided a lot of data, then we really see the remote sensing community start to form with the formation of IEEE Geoscience and Remote Sensing Society by Fawaz Ulabi in 1980. This was really set up to be an international cooperation and was driven also by the EU community. So the term radio oceanography was used before remote sensing, and this was part of the transition that occurred after the 20th URSI General Assembly. So what in this 1977 guest editorial is interesting is there's really three aspects. Radio oceanography is this is 1977, is rapidly approaching a level where remote sensing tools and techniques offer the promise of routinely monitoring the oceans for economic benefits. So before, there was not enough really data to have this picture clear. And J.R. Appel, one person here, really makes a difference. It's principally through his efforts that the first oceanographic satellite, CSAT, was approved as a NASA project. This is a case where an individual with a vision made this happen and really changed the landscape of the scientific inquiry. Another thing that I thought was very interesting about Cal's preface was that he noted research activity, international research activity, particularly in the USSR in oceanography in the 70s. And not only that, but 12 years, 15 years later, when the wall came down, this provided a lot of interesting and very productive collaboration when these scientists came to the US, and particularly through environmental technology laboratories, and gave rise to a lot of new research in oceanography and wave scattering. So these are all connected. Okay, so on the evolution of wave propagation. So wave scattering and theoretical approaches, if you look in the digest from the 70s and 80s, there's a lot of sessions in Commission F that were basically wave scattering, theory and application. And a lot of times they were in Commission B or Commission F, and sometimes they were joint sessions, but in general, they were theory and application. And with space-based instruments really becoming more common, the applications aspects of those really gained momentum. And atmospheric modeling and sounding, land surface modeling, and attenuation really became verifiable by a lot of the measurements and data that were being seen by the instruments. So just to look at the evolution of topics in tropospheric propagation, propagation measurements and modeling by the Naval Ocean Center in San Diego in the 70s was really followed by multiple organizations and measurement campaigns ongoing, and looking at the effects of ducting and primarily over water and coastal regions. And by the way, these two slides are presented by Tom Hanley. I asked for contributions from various folks that were active in these areas. And the first discussion of really the parabolic equation for method for propagation modeling by John was in Johns Hopkins APL in 1982, and more activity by the organizations in the late 80s and early 80s focused on improving the model fidelity and use cases. And the focus was also on meteorological measurements for characterizing refraction, and through the 80s and 90s gave way to investigation of numerical weather prediction. Numerical weather prediction models for our propagation beginning in 2000 and continuing really to the present day. So with emphasis on millimeter wave propagation, this focused the understanding the effects of atmosphere and satellite communications and for radiometric or remote sensing from satellites, as well as the profiling of clouds. So and this is where Han Leibe's laboratory measurements and work at ITS through the 70s and up until the 1990s was really important, along with the Advanced Communication Technology satellite, which was also responsible for a lot of satellite measurement campaigns in the 90s to the 2000s to understand millimeter wave propagation. And this led to dramatic increases in the accuracy of the effects of clouds, gaseous, and rain attenuation. And also, I'd like to mention the Leibe lectureship series that arise out of some of this work. This was in microwave and optical spectroscopy as applied to radio science, remote sensing, and telecommunications. And I have a picture here of the 2019 Leibe lecture by Domenico Cimini, and this was on the ground-based radiometry. So this is Al, Domenico, Mrs. Hans Leibe, and Ed Westwater. And this, I thank Ed Westwater for providing this picture. So with the remote sensing aspect, ground-based instrumentation, these slides and pictures were provided by Fawaz Ulubi and Ed Westwater, and it shows the progression of ground-based instrumentation for doing these atmospheric measurements from the 1970s. This is an example in the upper left where we're looking, Fawaz was looking at atmospheric transmissivity in the 200 to 300 gigahertz range, which was quite novel in the 1970s, using the sun as a source, and then looking at similar angles away from the sun in order to look at atmospheric transmissivity. Similar ground-based measurements, radiometer profiler, both in tropic environments, in the case of New Guinea, and high latitude environments to better understand the attenuation and role of the atmosphere in impacting propagation. And then we look at airborne remote sensing, and I'd like to thank Al for providing these two slides. Through the 80s, the typical a common aspect was to develop your sensor, do an airborne measurement, understand the phenomenology, and then you'd be in a great position to propose a satellite mission. And this was some examples of early flights of utilizing the 118 gigahertz O2 emissions to understand atmospheric profiling. So here's an example in 1986 of the 50 gigahertz radiometer and 118 gigahertz spectrometer to understand, if the 50 gigahertz line up until that point was used more commonly for atmospheric profiling. And this is actually important work to show that 118 could also provide some of the same information, because 118, shorter wavelength, can actually be used in the modern context with a smaller footprint or a smaller instrument because of this shorter wavelength, and provide a lot of the same information, or at least a level of information that was still useful for numerical weather prediction. And then the next step really in airborne imagery was using polarimetry. So these novel concepts of polarized microwave measurements from airborne platforms with a gimbal-mounted radiometer was also showing the phenomenology of ocean surface wind retrieval, and provided also some good insights regarding atmospheric corrections at 89, using multispectral measurements to understand the atmosphere and surface measurements. And now I'd like to talk a little bit about the space-based side of this. So up until, from the early 70s, when we first started seeing the remote sensing instruments, I think 1972 and 1975, we see the first spectrometers in space that were looking at atmospheric temperature profiling. And up until, as the missions developed, the instruments really got more capable over this period, and larger platforms with instruments with varied types on a single platform. And that trend really continued until about 2010 or 2009 or so, really in this country. And the things that really impacted this was the compatibility of sensors and the expense of mission assurance, putting all these sensors on one platform. At this point, there was really a push for better value and a push for disaggregation of sensors to provide better value for remote sensing. And this led to the growth of small satellites as remote sensing platforms. And here we have some examples of the Tempest instrument, again going back to the difference between 50 gigahertz and 118 gigahertz atmospheric profiling. 118 gigahertz with a shorter wavelength and a similar atmospheric attenuation structure allows us to get information from a smaller platform. It's more economical and therefore easier to build a commercial value around those measurements. And these are all aspects that were shown in Commission F and URSI. So going to the Tempest instrument that was first launched in 2018, here you can see that it's following a Hurricane Dorian, a 10-day track. And at this time, we were seeing presentations that, showing data from small satellites that were very similar to these large platforms a decade earlier. And and the speakers would challenge people to say, well, is this image from a small satellite that's 1/10 the cost? Is it the same as this from this other instrument that is much more established or better calibrated? And as the calibration and the techniques improve, the value also improves, and therefore there's more measurements available for use. Another aspect of the small satellites is signals of opportunity, which is a very focused area within Commission F right now. This is an example of Cygnus that was launched in December of 2016, and it shows 8 individual observatories that are very relatively small compared to, again, the large platforms of the previous decade. And here we see the result, the measurements of soil moisture, global soil moisture, in the diagram below. And this chart is courtesy of Chris Ruff. So in summary, Commission F is a very adaptable commission. We've adapted to a lot of changes within the remote sensing community from the radio oceanography in the 70s to the smaller missions of the 2020s. And as I mentioned, the introduction to the space mission and instruments is really tied to the focus on remote sensing in Commission F. Transition to smaller missions and community involvement in space-based sensors is also another trend with CubeSats, where we try to take advantage of all these technology developments in the other commissions. And again, propagation models are also becoming larger and more complex and incorporated into larger models of the Earth's land, ocean, and atmosphere. And finally, I'd like to say that the Commission F community likes to involve engineering and math with science and to really highlight the fundamentals. And this is really the strength of Commission F. Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, so our next speaker comes from Commission G, and Phil Erickson, and the title of the talk is Progress in Understanding Our Ionosphere, Atmosphere, and Near-Earth Space through URSI Commission G, Selected 50-Year Highlights. Thank you.
Thanks, Jamesina. And it's quite an honor to address the conference and attempt to talk about 5 decades of work in 15 minutes, as you've seen from the previous speakers. I first got to this room as a graduate student in the late 1980s, so I can't pretend to have been here for all of Commission G, 50 years, but I've seen some of it. And I'm going to try to focus on a couple of things going along. I think Ross Stone's excellent 100-year history has places where you can go into more detail. I think that Commission, and by the way, this is just me representing the entire community. If I tried to put all the people on here who contributed material, that would be the rest of the talk. So I want to acknowledge everyone. I also want to thank Tom Gosserin and Anthea Koster for inviting me to attempt to do this. So, URSI Commission G is very interesting, and as you heard, when URSI commissions were numbers rather than letters, it goes right back to, honestly, the beginning of the radio field. If you look here, at the things that are listed for Commission G's kind of foci, it's really studying the ionosphere and remotely sensing it using a number of radio science-based remote tools. So when you have to study a low beta, weakly ionized, low temperature plasma like the Earth's ionosphere, you need to do both basic and applied research. So the very nice thing here is that the observational data record you accumulate goes hand in hand with the theoretical understanding, and even that even goes across commissions, as you're going to see. And in fact, I think you're going to see that between this one and Commission H and Commission J, and I didn't fit Commission E on here, but that was already mentioned earlier. If you look at the joint sessions over the last 5 decades, you're going to see that everything kind of works in concert. This is a reflection of the field in general, which means that system scale sort of measurements of something as complicated and dynamic, for example, as the Earth's ionosphere, are the way that the frontiers are going. So if you look at your common focus areas there, and I'm going to touch on some of these, it's really global morphology and modeling, in fact, of the ionosphere. Can we understand what's going on? That leads to understanding both the spatio and temporal variations of the ionosphere, which are complex, rich, and fascinating. And so for all the students in the room, please don't think that this is all done and dusted and it's 99%. We've got an enormous amount to do yet. That goes in hand with something at the core of URSI, which are tools and networks about remotely sensing these kinds of things. And I'll touch on just a couple of these. That even goes back to what was mentioned in an earlier commission about the theory and practice of how the radio waves propagate from A to B and how they get affected by the media that they go through. And then the applied aspect is inherent because radio communications are also, for example, transionospheric, so understanding the medium's variations have applications there. This notional ionosphere to 2,000 kilometers altitude, and I was talking to Mark Alkowski a little bit earlier, notional boundaries between Commission G and Commission H, and you can see even other techniques from other fields are a bit notional. So you're going to see a lot more joint measurements, joint conferences, joint special sessions that have happened gradually because that's where the science is going. This is incomplete, but I just took the list of the main URSI chairs, and I tried to start highlighting in orange some people that I know were very, very active in ionospheric remote sensing and understanding ionospheric plasma, and there's some of them, and I'm sure I've missed other people who would like to be associated with Commission G, but there's been a lot of activity in G throughout the history of URSI, not only US, but international. So if we go back to the very foundations of URSI, you go to Gregory Bright and Merle Tooth, back at NRL, who were inventing an ionoson. They have an HF transmitter, and they look upwards, and oh, this person named Heaviside who thought, oh, things are being refracted over the horizon. You're coming up with the first radar, the first remote sensing radio wave tool that's being used to do things like how high is the ionosphere. And then the development keeps going from there. You can see in this list by Terry Bullitt, a lot of new technologies involved in tandem with understanding. So there's this back and forth. And on the right side, you have the theorists, like the great Sidney Chapman, for example, who are trying to start with the fundamental understanding of production and loss, and then later transport, and coming up with very early and fundamentally informing theoretical expressions for what, for example, the ionospheric electron density profile looks like, which then go hand in hand with more measurements which lead to more complex theories. So again, there's this balance that is all through Commission G's history. The ionoson I mentioned being one of the oldest radars techniques, and at HF, we've got 5 decades, for example, of continuous ionoson development. The left-hand picture is the Digisonde 128, which was back in 1978, late 70s, which was what the group at Lowell was developing. Leading to the middle, the Digisonde 4D, which has now got, for example, angle of arrival information, polarization information. And then other people are developing other techniques like the Viper radar, which is coming out of NOAA, which you see a rack on the right-hand side. There's the Dynasonde, which you can find in literature. So because this is such a fundamental technique, multiple developments to actually remote sensing the plasma are continuing, and continue to this day, in fact, as software radio becomes and radar become even more capable. And just because, if you haven't seen it, here's a nice little picture of an ionogram animated over the day, the O and the X mode, the two magneto-ionic propagations at HF through the ionosphere. And you can see the time on the top there, and this is the Boulder ionoson. I'm grateful to Terry Bullitt for sending me this. This is what the bottom side of the ionosphere looks like. You'll notice that the trace is now fattening. There's ionospheric irregularities showing up, meaning that the scattering from the atmosphere is not a reflection like the Martin equivalent theorem. It's actually getting broad. And this is the bottom side. You can't really see the top side from the ground. And so people have also flown topside sounders, which do the reverse approach. Not only do you do this ionoson technique, but you also do things like run an HF radar looking down at an angle like the SuperDARN system, and that's this little ray tracing here. You try to do continuous Doppler measurements of what the plasma convection is doing. That requires, because HF is refracted by the ionospheric plasma, that you understand ray tracing. So here comes ray tracing. Here comes ionospheric measurements. And again, they're working hand in hand, being updated together. And again, we could talk about all the wonderful little diagnostics in there. And even today, we're moving to lower cost platforms here. We're even moving to using someone else's transmission as a signal of opportunity. On the left here, you see an effort from a citizen science collective between amateur radio operators and professionals to develop a personal space weather station, inexpensive enough that, for example, amateurs can go buy it, put it in their backyard, and have actual measurements that can dump into a unique and complementary view of what the professional tools that I've just shown you have been doing. Or you can take software-defined receivers and you can pick off the CODAR signal, which is being blasted away as an ocean surface sensing, and you look at all of this ionospheric structure and richness you get in here by building an instrument that literally exists only in the computer. It is not, you don't have both pieces. The pieces are actually assembled in the computer, meaning that information theory and now machine learning and artificial intelligence are also applicable to a technique which is a century old. So that's the exciting thing. Old becomes new continuously, and that Commission G has highlighted a lot of that. Well, okay, now you have to understand it. So if you run a whole bunch of different ionosphere, for example, ionograms, that's the GIRO network, and you assimilate it, for example, with incoherent scatter radars, I'll talk about that in a minute, topside sounders, satellite observations, rocket in situ observations at the bottom side. I'll talk about GNSS-TEC in a moment, radio occultation, point-to-point through the atmosphere, and even radio sky noise absorption, Commission J, rheometers. You put that together and you try to empirically model, and you get the continuously updated international reference ionosphere, which comes out of URSI core. So that's another nice thing, that the remote sensing that's going on in Commission G is, again, informing fundamental knowledge of, in this case, the ionospheric electron density profile and all of its myriad and wonderful variations. There are other models, of course, as well. The SAMI series, FLIP, Supim from the UK, other people that are taking advantage of this back and forth between observations, models, ratchet up understanding. And then we get to something that, again, has been a real focus of Commission G work, which is collective Thomson or incoherent scatter radar. And for those of you who have not seen this, it's really fundamental random Gaussian scattering from the free electrons in the ionosphere, which are electrostatically restrained or modified by the presence of heavy ions. And you're looking at a Bragg wavelength. So this is a thermal spectrum, and this is an incredibly powerful way to diagnose the full altitude profiles of the full ionospheric plasma state. And unfortunately, of course, it requires you innovate a bit. You need a megawatt hectare system. It is 210 dB attenuation from your transmitter to the receiver. Well, but you can do it. And in fact, if you do that, you start looking at resonance modes of the plasma. You start looking at the ion acoustic resonance mode. And I'm not even going to talk about it, but you can look at the Langmuir mode, the fundamental electron density oscillations. By having a very robust first principles plasma theory, you can take that and use it as a remote sensing tool that then lets you back out density, temperature, composition, velocity, really characterizing the fundamental plasma state, which is the thing that advances our understanding. And there's some megawatt hectare systems on the left hand for you. The intermediate is, in fact, a little movie of the spectra as a function of altitude. This is the ion acoustic spectra. And then you pour that to the right through your inverse model from literally fundamental plasma theory, and you get electron density full altitude profiles and things like direct plasma temperature measurements, which then a scientist can take off and use to try to understand in a modeling sense. So Commission G is filled with this kind of really incisive information, I think. And that's reflected in all the sessions that you can see going back through URSI. And then we get to another technique, which is a perennial feature of Commission G, which is GNSS, is really space weather diagnostics. Let's look at the ionospheric state, but also let's look at the variability. Differential delay on GNSS transmissions, your line of sight to the wonderful network that the Department of Defense has spent untold billions of dollars running. And again, you get to leverage that with your receiver on the ground. You don't have to pay for your own network of transmitters. And you can pick off the ionospheric delay and make global total electron content maps, and in fact, take off the background to do wonderful things like watch the 2017 eclipse come roaring through the United States, and supersonically leaving in its wake V-shaped waves that are basically shock waves as the sun turns off and turns back on. Look at how much data. There's, in 5 minutes, you get 500,000 line of sight observations if you have pick-off global networks of, say, a few thousand receivers. And then you can add radio occultation paths, spaceborne to spaceborne, as they cut through the ionosphere, to add more and unique observing geometries. And so the technique ends up being an incisive tool for understanding this really rich and complicated environment. Again, highlights of Commission G. You can then go back and look at, in fact, what are these spatiotemporal regularity structures on a statistical basis? Not just what things are now, but how are these behaving in terms of turbulence theory, cascades, various instabilities, Kelvin-Helmholtz, Rayleigh-Taylor instabilities. So you can go back to Jules Aron's work at the beginning of this 50-year period in 1977. Here he is looking at a linearly polarized VHF transmission, and look at all of the different fading. For those of you in the audience who remember strip charts, there they are. That was a little before me, but there you go. Obviously he changed the pen before he did that. And then you can pour that forward to, again, the GNSS cluster and its ability to transmit a pattern that the coding, it's coherent when it left the satellite at multiple frequencies, and then you can watch very, very deep fades. And there are entire sessions in Commission G devoted to understanding these and how they relate to the irregularity spectrum in the ionosphere, which is a fundamental core part of space weather. The upper right-hand plot is a global map of essentially the rate of TEC change. Again, that if you do this in a networked sense, sometimes you can run high-rate receivers and get very detailed scintillation and measurements and understand our ionospheric structure, but you can also get a global idea of where these go and tie it into where the geophysics is driving the ionosphere into these irregularities, because it has to dump the energy somewhere. So these are very, very powerful techniques. Again, a lot of them are created in the processing element. They are taking things and welding them together in new ways, and that's been a real highlight of Commission G work. And then I want to mention Commission H work, for example, because again, G and H work very, very carefully together. Even if you heat the ionospheric plasma by transmitting a very powerful wave at HF and you get complete absorption of that wave, and you pair it with a very, for example, powerful diagnostic using that collective Thomson scatter I talked about before, you can get very incisive measurements of what happens to the plasma when you actually dump energy into it. For example, here's stimulated electromagnetic emissions. This is a paper from '89. The pump wave is in the middle at 5.13 megahertz, and on the side bands, you see these particular responses, which are plasma turbulence. These are parametric decay instabilities. This is the natural plasma laboratory in a low beta plasma. Really, really hard to reproduce in the laboratory vessel, although we have colleagues who do that or try to. But you can again apply these remote techniques to fundamental plasma diagnostics. And then down here, I find this really exciting. If you pump the wave at just the right frequency, and you can look at the paper, this is the paper from last year, you can actually directly start to measure the ionospheric electron temperature in a nonlinear environment. When all of the Maxwellian assumptions that we normally use start to fracture, you can actually still figure out how the plasma is acting in an energetic sense, nonlinearly. That's the frontier of understanding for ionospheric thermodynamics, and again, it's welding all these techniques together. Notice it says GH there, again, because this is a joint thing. And I'm going to end by saying that the future is really bright for these techniques as they're being employed, again, to more broadly investigate these spectrums. On the left is work from our Canadian colleagues on something called the Ice Bear system. This is a VHF CW multi-static system that's actually looking at bright, coherent irregularities in the E region of the ionosphere where the aurora is dumping lots of energy in, and the plasma is reacting by resonating, and those irregularities tell us a lot about what the ionospheric structure looks like. In the middle is a shout out to Commission J. That is applying radio astronomy, optimal aperture synthesis imaging to an ionospheric radar image to actually not only sense structure, but also sense the full Doppler spectrum of the irregularities so that you can understand the fundamental physics. And finally, I will mention the last part, which is actually, again, at the frontiers. We've had orbital space debris mentioned. We're putting a lot of stuff in orbit, which is creating sub-centimeter sort of debris. And there's a lot of work going on, joint with G and H, on doing things like what are the soliton wakes and precursors. We had a wonderful session on that just yesterday. Can you actually use that to detect a sub-centimeter particle from, say, orbital debris going through an environment where it's really, really tough to directly scatter off of that? That also is joint with things like meteoroid work, dusty plasma scatter, and other things which have actually been, again, looked at for a long time. So just to summarize, and then I'll turn it over to Mark, we've been doing 50 years of innovation, at least in USNC-URSI, in these radio science techniques. As I've tried to convince you, theory and experiment go hand in hand. It's inherently joint work, not only in technique, but in applications and understanding across URSI commissions. And I would agree with the previous speakers that more joint sessions I would really encourage. It's where the cross-disciplinary knowledge comes out. This is a way to get also at fundamental plasma physics knowledge, especially irregularities. And ultimately, space weather understanding from this work is critical to the inevitable and rapidly growing spacefaring human society to do this in a measured way that doesn't devolve into problems of things interacting with one another. So I'll leave you with another, I'm very, very looking forward to another 50 years of discovery, and thanks very much.
Okay, thank you very much, Phil. And we'll move on to Commission H. Mark Golkowski will be giving that talk. Waves and Plasmas, a 50-year quest for resonance through inhomogeneities, anisotropies, and induced perturbations.
My first URSI meeting here, National Radio Science meeting, was actually back in 2005 as a student. So in my talk, I'm first going to just say, what does Commission H do? I think we're a very broad commission, and it's kind of hard to wrap your mind around all the different things that go into our commission. And then I'll talk about some of our past work, and again, only some. It's impossible to cover everything. In terms of ground facilities and active experiments, multi-spacecraft observations, laboratory experiments, and finally, machine learning and simulations. So if you look at the official definition of our commission, this is what you see here. So we're waves and plasmas, including space and laboratory plasmas, and then you have a long list of things there. Unfortunately, even if you read that 3 times, I don't think it really gives you a good sense of what we actually study and what questions we're trying to answer. Fortunately, though, one of our members was interviewed by a prominent media personality a few years ago, and he was able in that interview to actually very succinctly describe and articulate what we do. So I'm going to just play that because I really wasn't able to compete with it, and we'll see if that clears up the picture. So.
But there's another huge star making headlines this week, and this one is actually a huge star. It's the sun, which in less than 48 hours has emitted 2 massive bursts of electrified gas at the Earth. The first of these disruptive solar flares took place Wednesday, buffeting our planet's magnetosphere. The flare caused a series of geomagnetic storms across our atmosphere, leading to disruptions in radio signals airplane communications, and satellite operations. Scientist, plasma physicist Bruce Tunney spoke about the size of the flares.
When the flares and the coronal mass ejections come out from the sun...
You know what? Can we... I'm sorry, Doctor. You're a plasma physicist. This is the only time anyone's going to talk to you. Do you understand? This is your chance. Show some enthusiasm. Give us your A game.
So NASA has, with their cameras,
you know
they can detect
can we just,
the
please,
direction
I'm
that
sorry.
things are going.
I'd expect that kind of lackadaisical bull from a philatelist or an entomologist, but not from a plasma physicist. I'm sorry, I can't.
Okay, so that was a total disaster, right? You can see how they make fun of us in the popular media. So let me play another video here, no audio, I'll just talk over it. What we really try to study with Commission H is near-Earth space, and there's overlap with other commissions in this too. But we try to understand the physics of everything from the aurora, northern lights. We make observations on the ground and in space. The one thing that was accurate in the Jon Stewart clip was that the sun is actually the major forcer of a lot of the physical phenomena that we're trying to study. So emissions from the sun, solar flares, coronal mass ejections, impact the Earth's magnetic field, will wildly perturb it. Actually, those minute large and small perturbations are what kind of enables a lot of machine learning techniques, which I'll touch on later. In terms of radio science, what's fascinating is because of the plasma environment out there in the magnetosphere, you actually have waves generated from these solar events, and then those waves are resonant with different particles, and you get very interesting wave-particle interactions. And the particles can be observed on satellites, as we'll see here in a second in the video. They can also damage satellites, which is another aspect of our research and why, for example, there's been a long tradition of DoD support for Commission H. So you have a particle being detected by a spacecraft. Another way to think about the Commission, this is in terms of altitude. So if Commission G is primarily the ionosphere, Commission H overlaps with the ionosphere, goes up into the magnetosphere, and then kind of Commission J is beyond that, right? So it kind of makes sense that it goes GH, Commission I is imaginary, you can't see it, and then J after that. So just to give you a taste of how complicated things get when you introduce a plasma. So here are dispersion diagrams. So these are frequency and wave numbers. So on the left, we have free space, straight line, speed of light propagation. As soon as you introduce a plasma, you get a cutoff frequency at the plasma frequency. It's still one solution, pretty manageable. But if you then introduce a magnetic field, you can see you get multiple solutions. The solutions change depending on which direction you're going in the magnetic field. If you include ion physics also, then you get even more solutions in the lower frequencies. So it becomes very complicated very fast. You can see here are the key frequencies we study. So we study frequencies all the way from ELF, extremely low frequencies, all the way up to HF. And I think what also makes our commission unique is a lot of our members, not all, but a lot, like to not only observe, but perturb and observe. They want, how can we make the plasma hot and unstable? So the way they do that is with rocket fuel burns, chemical releases, and using high-power EM radiation as well. So we'll walk through some of the facilities that have been used to do that. Arecibo Observatory, I think everyone knows this. It was already mentioned by Phil also. This has served a lot of commissions. So it was intended for incoherent radar studies. It eventually started to be used for atmospheric studies, planetary radar, radio astronomy. But there's a unique kind of active component to it. Phil also mentioned this, is really a Commission H specialty is an HF ionospheric heater. So you can see in this picture from 1972, in addition to the radio astronomy feeds and the incoherent scatter radar, they're already putting 5 megahertz HF high power heater there. Such high power that it would arc and spark very often. They later moved the heater off-site and then back in the dish, but this has been something that's been going on for a long time. Saipol Station is a facility that's appeared in much less Hollywood movies than Arecibo. 0 probably, but this was a very high power ELF, VLF transmitter deployed in Antarctica. Why in Antarctica? Because the ice separation actually lifts you off the conducting ground by a little bit. This really enabled fascinating experiments in that you could launch pulses into near-Earth space, watch them come back stronger and with new frequencies. So you're really exciting nonlinear features there. So both SIPL and Arecibo are unfortunately gone. Now we have HARP. And what's, I think, great about HARP is it sort of can do both what SIPL and Arecibo used to do. So HARP is also a heater, but it's in the subaurora region, so it can actually modulate overhead electrojet currents and create a giant VLF antenna, so you can do the SIPL-like experiments. And you can do the Arecibo-like heating experiment. So this is stimulated EM emissions. You send up a high-power radio wave, and additional radio waves or a broadened spectrum comes back from the nonlinear plasma physics. You can actually create artificial aurora and artificial ionospheric layers. That is really fascinating. At the same time, it's not as simple that, oh, there's just so much power and they're ionizing directly. This ionization is highly indirect. There's many wave-particle interactions and complicated physics that are not yet fully understood that go on in creating extra plasma in the ionosphere. So I also dug into the archive to prepare this talk, and I looked at actual word occurrence of these 3 facilities over the years, over the last 50 years. So you can see initially Arecibo here in the blue dominates, probably because it was used by so many different commissions. But there was a time when HARP actually took it over briefly. Then the DoD stopped funding HARP. That dropped off. And interestingly, SIPL Station, which was kind of came in third here, it shut down in '89. Then the data was actually digitized from analog tape, and it had a resurgence. So this kind of shows that even these legacy facilities, we can still get a lot of fascinating science out of them. Another interesting word analysis thing here, I looked at the words plasma and frequency. So frequency, I think, is a universal URSI word. Every commission uses the word frequency. Plasma is more commission H, and it's interesting how often those words both came up. Whistler is another classic kind of commission H word. And I also searched for machine learning. So there's no mention of machine learning at all until 2012. So actually, this is the first URSI National Radio Science meeting paper that mentions machine learning at all. So if anyone from this paper is here, congratulations to you. I think that's a landmark achievement, or a pioneering achievement, let's say. Okay, so if we can get great results from facilities on the ground, why not try to also do things directly in space? And that was what the DSX mission sought and did. It was launched in 2019 and operated for almost 2 years, and it involved an actual high-power VLF transmitter directly in space. You can see the pulses that it generated there, and there's papers on this actually at this meeting as well. In terms of now spacecraft that mainly just observe, don't perturb, there's been many of those. But I just wanted to highlight here the multi-spacecraft mission. So about once in a generation, a really good idea comes out of France. And the cluster mission here was the first mission that had spacecraft in relatively close formation. So down to 100-kilometer separation, which seems like a lot, but it's actually very close when you think about space. That let, being able to see the same waves with 4 different spacecraft kind of let us do the kind of remote sensing things that other commissions talked about in space at these very low frequency wavelengths. This was followed up by missions then by NASA, which had different, many unique contributions, and the data is still being studied for those. And then there is, some of our members say, well, okay, can we reproduce some of these fascinating physics in the lab in a really more controlled environment? Now, this is very challenging because it's easy to create a fully ionized plasma in a lab, but it's not that, it's nearly impossible to create a fully ionized plasma that's fully collisionless, like the plasma in space, and reproduce the exact physics that are going on there in space. Nevertheless, there's great work coming out of those efforts, and 2 here are, I guess, the 2 most prominent ones, which are often featured at this meeting, are the NRL Space Physics Simulation Chamber and also the UCLA Large Plasma Device. And then finally, the advanced, the huge advances in computing that we've had in the last generation have really enabled a lot of both what I call state evolution models, so when you have equations of state and you're trying to simulate those, and machine learning models. So the main kind of models in Commission H are quasi-linear global diffusion models. Those are the ones that try to model what many people call space weather, those energetic particle fluxes. And then we have self-consistent simulations, which actually model the effect of waves on particles and particles back on waves. So that's usually done with what's called particle and cell models, which require a lot of computational resources. And then machine learning, I think it's probably affecting a lot of our commissions. Jacob Bortnick published a kind of what I see kind of a landmark paper, which really kicked it off strong in our commission in 2016. And there's now we have whole, I said that machine learning appeared first as a word in 2012. Now we have whole sessions titled machine learning. So I think that's something that's really going to be more and more important. So just to summarize, Commission H has had a wonderful 50 years. We've sought to both observe and perturb and observe plasmas in near Earth space using observations in ground, space, and in the laboratory. Advanced computer models are really bringing us closer to the long-term vision of being able to both understand and predict the near Earth space environment. What have we learned? I think it's uncontroversial to say that the radio and plasma environment of near Earth space is much more complicated than we knew 50 years ago. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Mark. That was great. Next, from Commission J, we have Allison Ford is going to be giving a talk, and also Ken Kellerman was also instrumental in preparing this talk, but he is unable to attend. The title of the talk is Discovering the Radio Universe.
Okay. All right. Hi, everyone. I'm Allison Ford. I'm the current chair of Commission J on radio astronomy. I had invited Ken to present this plenary, but unfortunately he couldn't make it to Boulder this year due to family illness. So I'll be giving his presentation on his behalf. So although radio astronomy is only 90 years old, the past 90 years have seen a series of remarkable discoveries by radio astronomers that have fundamentally changed our understanding of the universe and its constituents. Stephen Chu was a summer student at the National Radio Astronomy Observatory in the 1970s. Stephen left radio astronomy after that summer, but went on to win a Nobel Prize in Physics for his work on cooling and trapping of atoms. Later, he became Obama's Secretary of Energy. Stephen recently wrote, "If you are the first person to look under a rock with a new set of tools, you don't even have to be that smart to discover something new." Starting in 1933, radio astronomy became that new tool, which was used to discover many previously unknown astronomical phenomena. Since the dawn of civilization, all we knew about the universe came from observing this narrow slice of visible light in the electromagnetic spectrum. But following Karl Jansky's 1933 discovery of cosmic radio emission, a whole new previously unknown part of the spectrum, from 1 millimeter to tens of meters, became available to study the universe. As we all know, there is no Nobel Prize for astronomy or for astrophysics. The story is that Alfred Nobel's wife ran off with an astronomer, so he excluded astronomy at his bequest. In fact, there's no evidence that Nobel ever married, but it makes a good story. Nevertheless, until 1974, there had been no Nobel Prize given for any astronomical discovery. Then the first 3 Nobel Physics Prizes given for astronomical discoveries were for the work done in radio astronomy. And later, there was a 4th prize to radio astronomers. These were to Ryle and Hewish in 1974 for the development of synthesis imaging and for the discovery of pulsars. 4 years later, Arno Penzias and Bob Wilson were recognized for their discovery of the cosmic microwave background. Then Russ Hulse and Joe Taylor for the first detection of gravitational radiation. And again in 2006, Dave Wilkinson and George Smoot received the Nobel Prize for their precise determination of the black body spectrum of the CMB and the detection of small-scale anisotropies. But these were not the only paradigm changes brought about by radio observations. This slide shows some of the most important discoveries in radio astronomy made over the past 90 years. These range from solar radio bursts, electrical storms on Jupiter, and the greenhouse effect on Venus, to radio galaxies, quasars, pulsars, the CMB, interstellar masers, gravitational lensing, the first evidence for an evolving universe, the discovery of the first exoplanets, and much, much more. Nearly all of these discoveries were accidental or serendipitous, but in each case, they led to new fields of research that were previously completely unknown. For example, luckily, Carl Jansky was working during solar minimum. If it had been a few years earlier or later, or if he was working at a longer wavelength than 15 meters, the cosmic radio noise would have been absorbed in the ionosphere. If he had been working at a shorter wavelength than 15 meters, the signal would have been too weak to detect with his primitive equipment. Russell Hulse was lucky as a graduate student working at the Arecibo telescope when he arbitrarily set a detection limit when searching for new pulsars. Had his cutoff been a few percent higher, he would have missed discovering the binary pulsar, which led to the first detection of gravitational radiation. Burke and Franklin didn't set out to discover radio storms on Jupiter, but were using their radio array to study the Crab Nebula. They were lucky that Jupiter happened to be at the same declination as the Crab Nebula. When Jupiter fortuitously passed through their radio beam, they discovered bursts of radio noise that could have been discovered much earlier had anybody thought to look. So these examples are not meant to minimize the skill and expertise of the investigators. As Louis Pasteur said in 1854, in the field of observation, chance favors the prepared mind. Often it was the right person in the right place doing the right thing, but sometimes they were fortunately doing the wrong thing. Often the observers were looking for something else. Sometimes they were just using a new instrument and were just looking. Mostly the investigators were young, generally under 40. Generally they were experienced physicists and engineers and had little or no background in astronomy, which was probably a good thing. They didn't know what they didn't know. Some of the discoveries were made at universities and observatories, but others came about from work in commercial industry and even some from military activities. Theory played a very little role, and sometimes wrong or incomplete theory even delayed the discovery. For example, a proposal to use the NRAO 140-foot radio telescope to detect interstellar water vapor was turned down on the advice of a prominent astrophysicist, but it was later found using a small 6-meter antenna. Ewan and Purcell only expected to place an upper limit on the 21-centimeter neutral hydrogen line and almost dropped the project, as Van de Hulst had incorrectly indicated that their sensitivity was inadequate by a factor of 100. But Ewan's detection of interstellar hydrogen resulted in the fastest Harvard PhD dissertation on record and started a whole new field of research. John Bolton thought that the galaxies M87 and NGC 5128 were nearby galactic objects because he could not comprehend the enormous radioluminosity that was implied by their identification with distant galaxies. A decade later, for the same reason, Jesse Greenstein missed the discovery of quasars, although he had measured the large redshift of the quasar 3C48. Oh.
Or are you still on that slide?
I am still on that slide.
Oh.
Okay. These discoveries came about mostly as a result of the remarkable improvements in the sensitivity of radio telescopes during the past century, and the use of innovative new techniques such as interferometry and cryogenically cooled receivers. This plot shows the improvement in the sensitivity of radio telescopes since Carl Jansky's simple Bruce array, a factor of 10 to the 12, or more than an order of magnitude per decade. Ken made a note here that when he started in radio astronomy, and he pointed out that it was not quite 90 years ago, it was still widely accepted that because of the long wavelengths involved, the resolution of radio telescopes would never compete with that of optical telescopes. In fact, as we now know, the reverse is true. The improvement in the angular resolution of radio telescopes has been perhaps the most dramatic more dramatic than the improvement in sensitivity, and now exceeds the resolution of the best optical telescopes on the ground or in space by orders of magnitude. Starting in 1967, the angular resolution of radio telescopes became essentially unlimited with the development of tape recording interferometry, which eliminated the need for any direct connection between interferometer elements. Karl Jansky could barely distinguish different parts of the sky. The Event Horizon Telescope, which operates at short millimeter wavelength, and the Russian space-based Radioastron VLBI satellite have each achieved a resolution of about 10 microarcseconds. This is sufficient to read a newspaper from 5,000 miles away. This next slide shows an integral plot of the number of radio astronomy discoveries as a function of time, since Jansky and Groth-Reber's pioneering work in the 1930s. Until about 1980, there was a rapid rise in the number of new discoveries, but since then, it's leveled off with only 2 significant discoveries made in the past 25 years. So why has the rate of new discoveries slowed down? Well, maybe there are only so many things to discover, and we have discovered them all. However, the earlier discoveries were the result of innovative new techniques and major instrumental advances, such as interferometry, VLBI, or the opening of the millimeter spectrum. The newer instruments, such as the VLA, the VLBA, ALMA, Westerbork, etc., were huge quantitative improvements, but did not introduce any new techniques that were the basis of the surge in the post-war discoveries. Also, radio astronomers more and more now depend on user facilities, and there is little of the hands-on involvement characteristic of the earlier years. This means that there's less understanding of the instrument and perhaps the ability to distinguish new phenomena from instrumental effects. Also, there is the restrictive impact of obsessive peer review. Not only are publications refereed, but in order to even observe or to get funding, we need to write a proposal describing in such great detail what we will discover that it is now hard to discover anything new that wasn't already expected. And anything out of the ordinary is likely not to be approved by conservative time assignment committees who are afraid of failure. At the same time, we depend on using complex software packages written by others, which we may not fully understand. As Jocelyn Bell wrote in her PhD thesis, if the aerial output had been digitized and fed directly to a computer, pulsars might well have not been discovered, because the computer would not have been programmed to search for unexpected objects. So in 2002, at a press conference speculating on Iranian weapons of mass destruction, Secretary of Defense Donald Rumsfeld told reporters, "There are things we know we know. We also know that there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know that there are some things we do not know, but there are also unknown unknowns, the ones we don't know we don't know." So an earlier slide listed the things we think we know from radio astronomy. The known unknowns include the discrepancy in the Hubble constant as measured by water maser interferometry and other classical techniques, and that determined by the Planck satellite. The nature of dark matter, the nature of dark energy, the detection of the epoch of reionization of the universe, also the excess of non-thermal cosmic background, first detected by the Arcade 2 balloon experiment, whose origin is still unknown. And perhaps the most interesting known unknown, are there other intelligent civilizations in the universe? Over more than 60 years, hundreds of observations have searched for radio emission from an extraterrestrial intelligent civilization. So far, these observations have been unsuccessful, but clearly the detection of other technically capable civilizations will be one of the most profound discoveries of the human race. Then there are the important unknown unknowns, the things we don't know we don't know. In order to build any new scientific instrument these days, one must prepare an extensive scientific justification, describing in detail the planned scientific programs. Inevitably, by the time the telescope has been funded and built, the old problems have been solved and the new ones appear. A recent example is the Canadian CHIME telescope, which was built to study the epoch of reionization, but has been the most productive telescope to study the recently discovered fast radio bursts, which were essentially unknown when CHIME was conceived. As the Jodrell Bank radio astronomer Peter Wilkinson once remarked, radio telescopes are not known for what they were built for. Hopefully, the excitement of the next generation of radio telescopes, such as the NGVLA and the SKA, will not be in the old questions which they answer, but in the new questions that they will raise, and in the newer telescopes that we will argue need to be built to answer these new questions. So thank you very much, and if any of you are interested, Ken does have a history of radio astronomy book, which was written by him and Ellen Bouton, in case you're interested. I know some people are quite interested in this topic, so thanks again for your time.
Thank you, Allison, and to Ken Kellerman for that lovely talk. We have our last commission, and for our last commission, Susan Hagnes had some last-minute travel issues, so we didn't want to just drop our last commission. We want to include that Commission K in our plenary session. So she's going to be presenting remotely, and I didn't bring my notes with me, so Susan, perhaps you can introduce the title of your talk. Thank you.
Well, my presentation today is about the intersection of radio science and biology and medicine, and we're going to be looking at a celebration of the past and future of Commission K. And I will do my best to make up a little bit of time because I know that we're running after schedule. So we'll briefly look at the history of Commission K, which is fairly unique compared to some of the other commissions in that it is so young. So to get some of the facts about the creation of Commission K, I dove back into the 2021 100 Years book, and I also used a Radio Science Bulletin article from 2009 as a source. And I want to start with a caveat that I can't possibly pay tribute to an adequate number of pioneers in the field in a 10-minute celebration here. So the way I look at things is we celebrate the many giants in our field in our daily work as we stand on their shoulders. So starting in the 1970s, Commission K did not yet exist. There were some sessions on bioelectromagnetics at the National Radio Science meeting in 1972. And then in 1975, Commissions A and B were pulled together to form an intercommission working group to look at measurements related to the interaction of electromagnetic fields with biological systems. Now, I'll note that this initial intercommission working group launched what has essentially been a 50-year successful ongoing collaboration once Commission K was formed with other commissions like A and B. Then in the late 70s, there were some additional developments. There was an international symposium on biological effects of electromagnetic waves held in 1977. And the Bioelectromagnetic Society was formed in 1978. Now, this is a multidisciplinary organization of both biological and physical scientists, as well as physicians and engineers. And everyone's interested in this organization in the interactions of electromagnetic fields with biological systems. I'll note that several of our colleagues who are active in Commission K and have been active since its inception have in fact served as the president of the Bioelectromagnetic Society. So a great example of that is Frank Barnes. They're at University of Colorado Boulder. The first Bioelectromagnetic Society meeting was held jointly with the National Radio Science meeting and co-sponsored by Commissions A and B in 1979. All right, so then we go into the 80s, and there were two general assemblies of URSI that held concurrent symposia on topics related to biological effects or interactions of electromagnetic waves with biological systems. And so then URSI again went to an intercommission working group to suggest that an ad hoc commission be created that would be devoted to the electromagnetic interactions with biological systems. And that takes us to the beginning of the 1990s. There was a decision made by the URSI Council at the 1990 General Assembly in Prague to launch Commission K, and that occurred formally in 1991. And so while we're celebrating the 50th anniversary of the National Radio Science Meeting, Commission K's history is only 33 years in length to date. We can take a moment and honor the memories of two pioneers who served as the first chair and vice chair of Commission K, Jorgen Bach-Andersen and Maria Stuckley. Maria Stuckley went on to serve as chair of Commission K internationally, 91 to 93. And the first inaugural event occurred at the 1993 General Assembly in Kyoto. By 95, there was a special session of radio science that was devoted entirely to Commission K research. So in 1991, when Commission K was formed, here's the scope at that date. Commission K was formed to focus on physical interactions of electromagnetic fields from DC to daylight with biological systems. The Commission is also promoting the research and development in several other domains like biological effects of EM fields, interaction mechanisms, human exposure assessment, and exposure systems that allow us to perform those assessments experimentally, and medical applications. So there were a couple of really early driving forces that motivated the early research of Commission K. A significant amount of the early research and a significant emphasis focused on the area of low frequency fields. So namely, what are the bioeffects of human body exposure to 50 and 60 hertz electric and magnetic fields? And then, of course, another big driving force was the emergence of mobile communications technology in the 90s, the 1G handset shown here. That technology development ignited extensive research on the interaction between cell phone signals and the human body. So researchers were exploring how does the presence of the human body impact antenna performance? And as equally important, how does the presence of the antenna in close proximity to the head impact human health? There were some additional early driving forces in diagnostic and therapeutic medical applications. So the late 1970s saw a surge in research on medical diagnostic capabilities, and specifically on microwave imaging or sensing. And that surge has continued to the present day. Interestingly enough, the early motivation was not clinical diagnostic imaging, but rather dosimetry. So just like on the previous slide, I showed you some of the early driving forces being related to environmental exposures. Here too, with the development of microwave imaging, the driving force was wanting to use medical imaging for non-invasive dosimetry. Some of the earliest work of the 70s was under development at Walter Reed Army Institute, led by Larson and Jacoby, and Larson was actually a medical doctor. So from the earliest days, there was a recognition of both of the multiple roles that microwave interactions play, both as an effector, so having a bioeffect, and as a sensor. This early work that you see here with imaging a kidney organ has since motivated much of the current microwave imaging and sensing research for clinical applications. What you're seeing here is an early transmission imaging experiment where a transmitting and receiving antenna was mechanically scanned on each side of a perfused kidney. And some amazing, really early stage images were formed. From the mid-1970s onward, switching over to the therapeutic side of this slide, microwave hyperthermia has attracted the attention of the oncology community because of cancer treatment limitations with radiation and chemotherapy. So some of the earliest work on microwave hyperthermia involved applicators, in other words, waveguides, whose heating patterns and maximum heating rate were highly variable from one tissue environment to another, as you can see in these plots from thermographic cameras. And I'll note that some of this early work in the 80s and early 90s that you see published here, it served as motivation for much of the work that I've done in Commission K. There was another really important early driving force, and that is the determination of the dielectric properties of tissue. And of course, the citation classic here that came out just a couple years after the formation of Commission K is a physics and medicine biology trio of papers published by Gabriel et al. That provided a meta-analysis of the dielectric properties of a large number of tissues, both animal and human. So if we fast forward to today and look at some of the contemporary Commission K examples, I can highly recommend a review paper that was published by, in fact, several former or past chairs of Commission K, including Asamina Chiorti, Gianluca Lazzi, Erdem Topsakal. And this review paper showcases a number of really compelling Commission K topics: body area antennas, both RF and inductive telemetry, wireless power transfer, medical implants, materials for wearable antennas, human body phantoms, both experimental and computational, thermal therapies like microwave ablation, microwave imaging work that continues to this day, and then neurosensing, wireless passive neurosensors for recording brain signals, as well as neurostimulation, so techniques like transcranial magnetic stimulation and deep brain stimulation. I'll just very briefly highlight a contemporary example out of our own group at UW-Madison, focused on theranostics, so sort of the combination of diagnostic and therapeutic technologies. So we've been interested in, very recently, a multiphysics problem where we expose tissue to pulsed microwave energy, and each individual pulse itself is not strong enough to cause a macro scale heating, but if we continue to expose the tissue to those pulses over the durations on the order of minutes, we can ablate tissue, as you can see in this photo on the bottom. But interestingly, each one of those individual pulses that might be on the order of a microsecond in duration, when that pulse gets absorbed, there's a micro temperature rise that's enough to induce a thermoelastic expansion of the tissue, and that creates acoustic pulses. And so we've been exploring the potential for using the microwave-induced thermoacoustic signals to monitor the progress of ablation, where the ablation is being performed with using pulses of microwaves. And the way that we can monitor the evolution of the ablation is by tracking, as just one example, tracking the time difference of arrival of the acoustic pulse relative to when the ablation first started. You can see an experimental signal here measured during a microwave ablation experiment. And so as we look to the future, what does the future hold for Commission K? It's my strong belief that the work that we're doing in Commission K has to respond to the fact that we have an aging world population. So this map shows in 2015 the percentage of our population throughout the world aged 65 and over. And the predictions from the US Census Bureau in collaboration with the World Health Organization shows that these percentages are going to really dramatically increase by 2050. And so there are a variety of new electromagnetic technologies in support of healthy aging for this aging worldwide population, technologies that will support aging in place through new wireless technologies that can monitor health status, perform screening, detect falls. Energy harvesting is another really, I think, important future application for us. for powering devices, for monitoring, for rehabilitation, and then ongoing advances in point-of-care diagnostics as well as novel therapies. I think we're going to continue to see over the coming decades a vibrant array of research advances there that will be in support of healthy aging. So as we think about what's possible over the next 50 years, let me show you what has happened. Just one example where we can really track progress over the last, I'll put it at 40 years. If we look at computational human body models over a 40-year time frame, going back to the 1970s, one of the earliest examples is this computational electromagnetic simulation performed by Alan Taflov, which is with his then PhD advisor, Morris Brodwin, of looking at bioeffects of microwave exposure for radar operators. And so they performed computations of the absorbed power in the human eye. Very simplistic model by today's standards. Of course, it was very much state of the art in the 70s. And then if we forward 40 years later, we have entire populations of virtual human body models with extraordinarily detailed, exquisitely fine detailed anatomies. And so if we use this as just one metric of the kind of advances that can take place over a 40-year period, I think we've got a lot of exciting work ahead of us. So here's to the next 30 to 50 years of advancing human health as electromagnetics engineers and radio scientists. And again, I want to give a shout out to Jay Messina, Simpson, and Colin Mahoney for accommodating my flight cancellation woes on Tuesday. We had a big snowstorm here in Madison. And I also want to say good luck to my Wisconsin colleagues who did make it to Boulder. A warning that we have another snowstorm hitting Madison tomorrow through Saturday. So I wish you safe travels back. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan, and to all of our plenary speakers. Thank you for all your contributions. So at this time, there's going to be a student mentoring lunch, and it's to the right, and you walk down the sidewalk a bit. Just follow the crowd if you don't know where you're going. All the students and the plenary speakers and the commission chairs are invited to join us. We're hoping that at every table there can be at least one commission chair or plenary speaker. And then after lunch, there'll be a Q&A. We have 3 panelists, one from government, one from industry, and one from academia. So we hope you can join us. Thanks.